Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Trail of the Forgotten Souls. I always thought of myself as an adventurous soul, someone who thrived on the thrill of exploring the great outdoors. The mountains had always called to me, their rugged beauty wrapping around my heart like an old friend. But that was before the hike that changed everything. It started as an ordinary spring day, the sun breaking through the clouds, coaxing flowers to bloom and birds to sing. My friends and I had decided on an ambitious trail, a seldom trodden path leading to an overlook that promised a breathtaking view of the valley below. I felt a surge of excitement as we packed our gear, my heart racing at the thought of the adventure ahead. The drive to the trailhead was filled with laughter and chatter, the air thick with anticipation. We parked the car in a small gravel lot, the remnants of winter still clinging to the air. The mountains loomed ahead, ancient and imposing. I took a moment to breathe it all in, the crisp scent of pine and damp earth wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. As we set out, the trail was narrow and uneven, edged by thorny bushes and the occasional tree root that jutted out like a warning. The canopy overhead filtered the sunlight, casting dappled shadows on the path. I tried to maintain a steady pace, but the terrain was more challenging than I had expected. I pushed myself, determined not to lag behind, my friends' voices buoying my spirits. Hours passed, and the trail wound deeper into the woods. The sounds of nature enveloped us, the rustle of leaves, the occasional call of a distant bird, but as we climbed higher, those sounds began to fade. An unsettling quiet settled over the forest, thick like a fog. I brushed it off, attributing it to the seclusion of the trail. Eventually, we reached a clearing, a small plateau that overlooked the valley below. It was a moment of pure bliss, the world stretching out beneath us like a green tapestry. We laughed, took photos, and sat for a while, basking in the glory of the view. I thought about how fortunate we were to share this moment, but as I looked around, I noticed something odd. The forest surrounding us seemed too still, too silent. I glanced at my friends, but they were preoccupied with their own revelries, unaware of the change in atmosphere. I tried to shake the feeling, attributing it to an overactive imagination. As we prepared to head back, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the ground. The descent was more treacherous than I remembered. Twisted roots and loose stones threatened to send me sprawling at every turn. I fell into a rhythm, focusing on each step, but a creeping unease settled in the pit of my stomach. The air felt heavy, and I found myself looking over my shoulder more often than I would have liked. It was then that I heard it. A sound, faint but distinct, a crack of a branch snapping in the distance. I stilled, holding my breath as I turned to look back the way we had come. My friends were too far ahead to hear it, their laughter echoing into the trees. I wanted to brush it off, tell myself it was just an animal, but deep down, a voice whispered that I wasn't alone. I quickened my pace, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The trail twisted and turned, and just when I thought I would catch up to my friends, I found myself at a fork in the path. I hesitated, glancing back one last time, expecting to see them just around the corner, but they were nowhere in sight. Choosing the left path, I pressed on, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me like a shadow. The further I walked, the more unnerved I became. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I called out my friends' names, but the forest swallowed my voice. The silence that greeted me in return felt oppressive, suffocating. Panic rose as I realized how disoriented I had become. I had no idea how long I had been walking or if I had even taken the right path. I stopped to catch my breath, scanning the dim light filtering through the leaves, hoping to catch a glimpse of that familiar laughter. Nothing. just the whispering wind and the creaking of trees. Then I heard it again, a soft rustle, closer this time. I turned sharply, heart racing, but all I saw were the trees standing like sentinels, their trunks thick and unyielding. I forced myself to breathe, to remain calm, but every instinct screamed for me to run. My legs felt leaden, and I realized I had to make a choice, turn back or push forward. With a shaky breath, I pressed on. This time, I moved faster, scanning the ground for any signs of my friends. I could almost hear the echo of their laughter in my mind, urging me to keep going. But then, something caught my eye, a flash of movement in the underbrush. I froze, my heart hammering once more. I edged closer, cautious but drawn by curiosity. What was it? A deer? A rabbit? But as I approached, the underbrush gave way to a small clearing littered with torn clothing and broken gear, hiking equipment that had clearly seen better days. My blood turned to ice as I recognized a familiar logo on one of the backpacks. It belonged to a friend who had hiked with us last year, a fun trip that now felt hauntingly distant. My pulse quickened, and I stepped back, suddenly aware of the eerie silence around me. I was now alone. Something else was out there, watching. A branch snapped behind me, and I spun around, but there was nothing. The air was thick with tension, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes boring into me. I started to back away, my instinct screaming for me to run. And then I heard it, a low growl, a sound that sent chills racing down my spine. I turned and sprinted back down the trail, my breath coming in quick gasps. The forest pulsed with life, but not the kind I wished to encounter. I was no longer a curious hiker, but a prey fleeing from an unseen predator. The morning light peeked through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows along the narrow trail. I trudged forward, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot my only companion. The early chill had given way to hints of warmth, but the air remained thick with moisture, clinging to my skin like a second layer. The forest was eerily quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I had always found solace in nature, but today, every rustle in the underbrush sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. Memories of last night washed over me, memories that I had hoped would fade with the dawn. The encounter by the fire, James's frantic words about the missing hiker he had read about on some online forum, still echoed in my mind. I had dismissed his fears as the ramblings of an overactive imagination. Yet now, alone in the wilderness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I pulled out my phone to check the time, but the screen flickered, revealing the dreaded no-service message. A sense of unease crept over me. I tucked the device back into my pocket, reminding myself why I had come here in the first place. I needed to clear my mind, to escape the tangled mess of my life. But the forest felt different today, more oppressive, as if the towering trees were closing in around me, suffocating the very air I breathed. I pressed on, trying to focus on the path ahead. I had marked a few waypoints on my map, nothing too ambitious, just a few hours hike into the heart of the woods. With every step, the narrow trail twisted and turned, every bend revealing more of the unfamiliar landscape. The further I ventured, the less inviting the surroundings became. The trees grew taller and knottier, their roots curling like fingers craving the earth. The once vibrant colors of the leaves faded into dull hues, as if life were seeping out of the forest, replaced by an unsettling stillness. Several times, I paused to take a sip from my water bottle, glancing back the way I had come, half expecting to see James trailing behind me. But I was alone, and the thought gnawed at me. Had he decided to turn back? I shook my head. He wouldn't leave me out here unaccompanied. He had promised to stick together, to look out for each other. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a small clearing, its openness a stark contrast to the suffocating trees surrounding it. I took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. But something felt off. The ground was disturbed, a patch of earth freshly turned. My heart raced as I crouched to examine it closer. A chill ran down my spine when I noticed the dark stains soaking into the dirt. Was that blood? My breath quickened, and I straightened up, scanning the area. A sense of dread washed over me, heavy and unrelenting. I recalled the stories James had recounted, of hikers who had disappeared without a trace, and the thought twisted in my stomach like a knife. I turned to leave the clearing when a sound pierced the silence, a low crack of branches breaking. My heart thudded painfully against my rib cage. Was it an animal? Or something worse? The stories played out in my mind, and I forced myself to think rationally. It could be nothing, just the forest settling under its own weight. I took a step backward, my instinct screaming for me to retreat. As I moved, something caught my eye. At the far edge of the clearing, hidden among the underbrush, lay a torn backpack. My stomach dropped. It looked as if it had been abandoned in haste. I approached cautiously, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. The backpack was weathered and worn, covered in mud and leaves. I knelt beside it, my hands trembling. The zipper was half open, and I hesitated before reaching for it. If someone had left this behind, they might have left in a hurry, in fear of something. But curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the zipper down, exposing its contents. Clothes, a water bottle, and a tattered map, no signs of a struggle, but my heart sank as I unrolled the map. There were markings on it, erratic lines that seemed to lead nowhere. I could feel the weight of the air shift, a breeze that smelled faintly of decay brushing against my skin. Suddenly, I heard it again, a rustling sound, louder this time. My skin prickled, and I glanced around, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "James?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response, just the echo of my own uncertainty. I stood up, my eyes darting around the clearing, searching for movement, any sign that I wasn't alone. The underbrush rustled again, and I felt a primal urge to flee, but where would I go? In the distance, I thought I saw a figure flitting between the trees, too swift to make out. Panic seized me. I dropped the backpack, my instinct screaming at me to run. I turned back toward the path, but my legs felt heavy as if the forest was trying to hold me back, to make me stay. I pushed myself to move, breaking into a sprint, the branches snagging at my clothes. I didn't look back. The air was thick with dread, and I could feel a presence lurking just out of sight. I raced along the trail, heart pounding in my ears, desperate to escape the darkness closing in around me. The forest had awakened, and I was no longer welcome. The morning sun filtered weakly through the canopy as I trudged deeper into the forest, each footfall swallowed by the damp earth. My breath came in shallow bursts, the weight of the previous day's events still lingering heavy in my chest. I had planned this weekend getaway to escape the chaos of life, but the woods felt more suffocating than liberating. Silently, I cursed my decision to hike alone, but the memory of my friend's laughter echoed in my mind, a sharp contrast to the oppressive silence that surrounded me now. I flipped the map over in my hands, attempting to decipher the hastily scribbled notes I had taken. The trailhead seemed deceptively easy to navigate, but each twist and turn brought me deeper into a maze of densely packed trees. There were no other hikers in sight, no sounds of nature aside from the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a crow. The air felt thick with expectation, like the seconds before a storm. As I moved further along the path, a chill crept through the air. I shivered involuntarily, not from the cold but from an unsettling sensation that something was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling, an instinctual dread clawing at the edges of my mind. I stopped, listening intently, heart pounding. Nothing. Just the wind whispering through the branches. I pressed on, hoping to reach the summit before noon. The trail dipped sharply, forcing me to navigate over roots that jutted from the earth like skeletal fingers. I stumbled, catching myself on a nearby tree, the rough bark scraping against my palm. As I regained my balance, a flash of movement caught my eye, a shadow darting between the trees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking the stillness. Nothing answered except for the rustling leaves, their sound now a mocking echo of my uncertainty. I forced myself to laugh, attributing my unease to fatigue and the isolation of the woods. After all, I had always found solace in nature. But with each step, that solace felt increasingly elusive. The path began to narrow, and the trees closed in around me, creating a tumult of twisted branches. I felt trapped, as if the forest itself had conspired to ensnare me. I glanced back the way I had come, but the trail faded into a sea of shadows. I was creeping toward the edge of panic, but I knew I couldn't turn back. I had to keep moving. An hour later, just as the sun reached its zenith, I stumbled upon a small clearing. It was a breath of fresh air, a momentary reprieve from the suffocating darkness of the woods. A few boulders jutted from the ground, and I slumped against one of them, taking a sip from my water bottle. It was there that I noticed something strange, a carved symbol etched into the rock, a crude figure swirling in on itself, reminiscent of a spiraling vortex. I leaned closer, tracing the shape with my fingers, and felt a shiver run down my spine. I had read about ancient symbols, rituals that offered protection or warned of dangers, but this felt different, sinister. I pulled my hand back, wiping the damp dirt on my shorts, and stood to survey the clearing. As I scanned the area, I felt an electric prickling at the back of my neck, a sense that the woods had hushed around me. I turned slowly, and in the distance, I saw it. A figure outlined against the trees, pale against the darkened backdrop, standing stock still. My heart raced, and I squinted in an attempt to make out any details. It was too far to discern any facial features, but I could see long limbs and a shock of unkempt hair swaying gently despite the still air. "Is someone there?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move. It felt like it was watching me, judging, and panic clawed its way up my throat. I stepped back, my instinct screaming at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Then it turned. Slowly. Its head pivoted unnaturally, and I caught a glimpse of something pale and gaunt, an expression that sent a jolt of terror coursing through me. I didn't wait to see more. I turned on my heel and bolted back the way I had come, adrenaline propelling me forward, branches clawing at my arms and face as I stumbled through the underbrush. I didn't stop to catch my breath until the clearing faded from view, but even then, I could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I struggled to regain my composure, but the forest threw my senses into disarray. The canopy above intertwined like a tangled web, blocking out the sun that had moments ago brightened my path. The temperature dropped, and the shadows lengthened, weaving shapes that danced along the edges of my vision. I came across the symbol again, carved deeper this time, and I averted my gaze, forcing myself to keep moving. I could still hear the faint rustle of something following me, a rhythm that matched my own frantic heartbeat. With every step, the sense of being pursued grew stronger, my mind racing with questions I dared not ask. What had I seen? And more importantly, was it still behind me? Desperation grew like a noxious weed, twisting my thoughts into a frenzy. I glanced back, but the path remained empty, swallowed by the darkness of the trees. I picked up my pace, my breath coming out in panic gasps. I could not afford to let the forest claim me. I had to escape. But as I broke through the thicket, I was met not with the familiar sight of the trailhead, but with an expanse of unfamiliar terrain, a gnarled mass of twisted roots and jagged rocks, all leading into deeper shadows. The forest had shifted, a mockery of my efforts to find my way. And against all reason, I could feel it behind me, the weight of something ancient and malevolent, ready to strike. In that moment, I made one last desperate choice. I turned off the trail entirely, plunging into the thick underbrush with no idea where I might end up, but with the instinctive urge to outrun whatever hunted me. The woods swallowed me whole, an eerie embrace of darkness and dread. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows that twisted like the gnarled roots beneath my feet. I had set out that morning with a sense of adventure tinged by a quiet trepidation. The trailhead had been nearly deserted, a stark contrast to the vibrant chatter of the group that had initially invited me. They had backed out at the last minute, citing obligations that felt more like excuses than commitments. Perhaps, if I had known then what I know now, I would have listened to my gut and followed their lead. I pressed on, each footfall muffled by the dense carpet of pine needles. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves filled the air, a reminder of the rain that had soaked these woods just days before. I had chosen this hike to escape the chaos of life, my recent breakup, the mounting pressure at work, but instead, I felt increasingly isolated, ensnared by the encroaching woods. As the trail narrowed, I became acutely aware of the silence surrounding me. The occasional rustle of leaves was absent, no birdsong broke the stillness. It was an unsettling quiet, as if the forest itself held its breath. I ventured deeper, pushing my unease aside, convincing myself it was merely nature's way of drawing me into its embrace. I reached a clearing, the sun spilling through the trees like liquid gold, illuminating the rugged rocks and tangled roots jutting from the earth. I paused, taking a moment to drink in the beauty around me. But the tranquility was short-lived, as I noticed something odd. At the edge of the clearing stood a weathered sign, barely legible beneath a layer of grime. I approached it, brushing the dirt away with my fingers. Warning, proceed at your own risk. My heart raced. I had read about the dangers of hiking in isolated areas, the lost hikers, the unexpected storms, but this felt different. A chill crept up my spine. I glanced around, feeling as if watching eyes lurked just beyond the trees. I shrugged it off, attributing it to overactive imagination. There were no other hikers, no signs of life other than my own. As I resumed my journey, the trail began to steepen, and I concentrated on each step. The air grew colder, biting against my exposed skin. I should have turned back then, returned to the warmth of civilization, but something compelled me to continue. Perhaps it was the allure of reaching the summit, the reward of a breathtaking view that waited just beyond the bend. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. I lost track of time as I navigated the twisting path. The deepening shadows began to stretch, fading the vibrant colors of the forest into a muted palette of grays. My stomach twisted with anxiety, reminding me that I had not planned to be out this long. It was then that I heard it, a faint rustling, like the whisper of footsteps behind me. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. I glanced over my shoulder, but the trail remained empty, swallowed by the gathering dusk. I shook my head, dismissing it as an animal or perhaps a trick of my mind. Yet unease settled deeper in the pit of my stomach, urging me to pick up the pace. With each step, the atmosphere thickened around me, the trees looming taller, their gnarled branches resembling skeletal hands reaching out of the dark. I'd read about haunted woods, places where the lost souls wandered, searching for something they'd never find. I swore I could feel their presence, heavy and oppressive, like a fog creeping in. Minutes turned into an eternity. I wanted to turn back, but the way behind me felt more daunting than the unknown ahead. As I pressed on, I caught sight of something glinting on the ground, a shard of glass, jagged and out of place. My pulse quickened. I picked it up, holding it up to the dim light filtering through the trees. A shard of a bottle, dark and foreboding. Had someone else been here? Or was this a warning? The forest began to whisper, the rustling sound intensifying. I quickened my pace, the adrenaline spurring me forward. That was when I saw it, a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. My breath hitched, body coiled tight with fear. I turned sharply, but nothing but shadows greeted me. Then, a low growl reverberated from the depths of the trees, a sound primal and guttural. My heart felt like it was going to burst from my chest as I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. I glanced down the trail, panic clawing at my throat. I needed to move. I ran. Branches clawed at my arms, sharp as knives, and roots threatened to trip me at every turn. I could hear it now, our relentless pursuit echoing behind me, a rhythm of breath and growl that sent shivers cascading down my spine. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I knew was I had to get away. I burst into another clearing, lungs burning and heart racing. There was no path, no clear direction, just a suffocating darkness closing in around me. Desperation clawed at my mind, but I spotted a tree with a white trunk, a massive sentinel against the encroaching night. I pressed my back against it, trying to quiet my frantic breathing. The growls had ceased, but the oppressive silence resumed, wrapping around me like a shroud. How could something so vast, so wild, feel so claustrophobic? My eyes scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of life, any indication that I was not alone. And then I saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows, tall and impossibly thin. My breath caught in my throat as it stepped into the faint light. It was a man, or had once been. His skin was gray, stretched taut over brittle bones, and his eyes glinted like coals, burning with an insatiable hunger. I stumbled backward, heart racing. The woods had come alive, its secrets rising to the surface, and I realized too late that some paths were never meant to be taken. The morning light filtered through the trees, painting the forest floor in dappled shades of gold and green. I had not slept well, plagued by nightmares that twisted the events of the previous days into something grotesque. The echoes of whispered warnings and half-seen figures haunted every corner of my mind. Still, I forced myself out of the tent, the damp air biting at my skin as I stepped into the crisp morning. The remnants of last night's tension still loomed over us, a thick fog that clung to my thoughts. I could feel the weight of Laura's anxiety as she stirred beside me, her eyes darting toward the shadows that danced in the underbrush. I had to remind myself that we were here for a weekend of escape, not terror. Yet, each rustle of leaves seemed like a reminder of the very real threats that lurked just beyond our sight. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and lukewarm water, we gathered our things and decided to explore a trail that wound deeper into the forest. It was one of the recommendations from the ranger, a gently sloping route that offers stunning views of the valley. But as we moved farther away from camp, the path narrowed, and the trees closed in around us like silent sentinels. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Laura asked, breaking the silence with a tremor in her voice. I could feel her eyes studying me, searching for reassurance that I didn't have. I nodded, though a sense of unease settled in my chest. "The map says it's just a bit further." The words came out steadier than I felt. I tried to push the anxiety down, but it bubbled back to the surface, making me hyper-aware of the way the wind whispered through the branches overhead, as if some unseen presence was eavesdropping on our every word. The trail began to dip steeply, and the sound of our footsteps crunched loudly against the gravel. I scanned the forest around us, its beauty almost sinister in the way it thrived in isolation. It was beautiful, but the serene facade hid something darker beneath. The shadows felt deeper now, more alive. As we rounded a bend, I saw it, a clearing that opened up to a breathtaking view of the valley below. The sight momentarily took my breath away, the layers of green cascading into the horizon. I turned to share the moment with Laura, but her gaze was fixed on something behind me. "What is that?" Her voice wavered, and I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I turned slowly, the smile on my lips frozen as I followed her gaze. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by a tree. It was too far away to see clearly, but I could make out the outline of a man, perhaps, or something like a man. He was still and seemed to be watching us. The air thickened, and my heart raced. "Let's go," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. I grabbed Laura's hand, and we backed away from the clearing, our senses heightened. The chill in the air was no longer just a breeze but something electric, wrapping around us, urging us to flee. As we retreated, the figure remained unmoving, an unsettling statue etched against the living backdrop. I glanced back, ready to run if needed, but the path was clear. After a few moments that stretched into eternity, I finally turned away, pulling Laura with me. "What was that?" she asked, her breath quickening. "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe just a hiker. Let's keep going." We hurried back the way we came, our pace quickening with each step. The underbrush rustled behind us, and I could have sworn I heard a soft, mocking laugh echoing through the trees. I shuddered and picked up the pace. There was no way we could have been the only ones out here, yet somehow we felt entirely alone. As we reached the spot where the trail forked, the tension was palpable. I felt the uneasy burden of indecision weighing on me. One path led back to camp, familiar and safe, while the other veered off into the unknown. "What do we do?" Laura's voice trembled, and I could see her mind racing with possibilities. I hesitated just a moment too long before I made a decision. "Let's go back." My voice sounded stronger than I felt. The day's light was beginning to wane, and I didn't want to be caught out here after dark. We turned back, retracing our steps, but as the forest enveloped us again, a sound pierced the air, a low, guttural growl reverberating through the trees. My heart lurched. I paused, gripping Laura's hand tighter. We exchanged wide-eyed glances, our breaths shallow and frantic. I knew we had to move, that lingering would only invite whatever danger was stalking us. So, we ran. The path twisted underfoot, and branches snagged at our clothes as we barreled through the underbrush. The growl morphed into something more, like a chorus of whispers, rising and falling, filling the air with dread. Just as we neared the campsite, I felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The trees seemed to close ranks behind us, as if sealing off our escape. I glanced back, and that same figure, the one from the clearing, stood at the edge of the forest, watching with an unnerving stillness. And then it moved, faster than anything should have been able to in that dense foliage. We stumbled, fear surging through us as we raced to our campsite. My mind could barely process the terror. All that mattered was getting back, getting away from whatever was hunting us in the shadows. When we burst into the clearing where our tent stood, the remnants of yesterday's security felt like a fragile illusion. I could still hear the distant whispers, the rustling foliage, and the growl that chased us close behind. This wasn't the adventure we had signed up for. We had entered a nightmare from which there was no waking. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, we faced the realization that darkness would soon envelop us, along with whatever had been lurking patiently in the trees. Story 2, Fair of the Forgotten. The night had draped itself over the city like a heavy fog, swallowing the last remnants of warmth and light. I shivered as I stepped onto the cracked pavement, the neon lights flickering above like distant stars in a forgotten galaxy. The air was thick with the scent of rain hitting asphalt, a promise of an impending storm. I had just finished my shift at the diner, where the last group of patrons had left, leaving behind only the clatter of plates being washed. I summoned a taxi through my phone, tapping the screen impatiently while I kept my eyes peeled for headlights weaving through the gloom. I had never liked the prospect of a late-night ride. The city felt different after dark, each shadow concealing something sinister. My phone buzzed, and the screen lit up with the car's details, a bright yellow sedan pulling up a block away. I tucked my scarf a little tighter around my neck and walked toward the waiting vehicle. The driver, a stocky man in his 40s, greeted me with a curt nod as I slid into the back seat. The interior smelled stale, a mix of fast food and something else that I could not place. His eyes, obscured by the dim light of the street lamps, darted to meet mine in the rearview mirror. "Where to?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gruff. Just take me to element 12, please," I replied, my own voice sounding small in the confined space. He nodded, and the engine roared to life, the tires splashing through the deep puddles that had collected on the street. I leaned back against the worn leather seat, fighting the unease creeping into my chest. The city unfolded outside, drenched in shadows and rain, each block feeling more foreign. As we drove, I glanced out the window, the rain creating a watery curtain that distorted reality. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and I looked closer, catching sight of a figure standing under a flickering streetlight. It was a woman, drenched from the rain, her face pale and drawn. She seemed to be watching us, her eyes wide and unblinking. I felt a shiver race down my spine, an involuntary instinct screaming for me to look away. "Did you see that?" I blurted out, pointing toward the figure. The driver craned his neck to look. "See what?" "The woman by the streetlight," I said, my voice wavering. She looked strange. "Just a drunk," he muttered dismissively, his eyes back on the road. "They're everywhere tonight." I settled back into my seat and tried to shake off the feeling of dread. I was being silly, letting my imagination run wild. But the woman's gaze haunted me, an echo of something deep and unsettling. The rain continued to drum against the roof of the car, a relentless soundtrack to my growing anxiety. Then, the driver turned down a dimly lit side street, one I didn't recognize. "This isn't the way," I said, alarm rising in my throat. "Shortcut," he replied, his tone devoid of reassurance. I felt my heart thud harder in my chest. "Are you sure?" "Trust me," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He sounded irritated now, like I was the one causing a problem rather than him ignoring the direct route. I glanced out the window again, the familiar landmarks disappearing behind a curtain of rain. The darkness felt thicker here, oppressive, even the streetlights were sparse and flickering. I should have said something, demanded he turn back, but a paralyzing fear held my tongue hostage. Then, without warning, the car lurched to a stop. I nearly jolted forward, the unexpected halt knocking the breath out of me. "What's wrong?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. "Nothing," he said, his tone shifting, a hint of something lurking beneath the surface. "Just taking a moment." I looked around, the shadows pressing in closer, the distant sound of raindrops drowning out the normal buzz of city life. "Can we keep going?" I begged, my hands gripping the edge of the seat. "Just give me a second," he snapped back, a flash of irritation crossing his face. I wanted to scream, to tear myself from the car and run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. It felt like eternity before he shifted the car into gear again, finally pulling away. "You okay?" he asked, though it sounded more like an insult than concern. I didn't answer, the knot in my stomach tightening. The streets twisted and turned, the rain now pouring down in sheets, blurring everything into a watercolor mix of dread and confusion. I felt isolated, trapped in this vehicle with a man I didn't trust anymore. Suddenly, the car headlights caught another figure standing on the side of the road, a man this time, drenched but eerily still, his eyes fixed on us. "Just keep driving," I urged, my voice shaking. "Relax," he said, dismissively. "Nothing's going to happen." But I could sense the change in the atmosphere, a heaviness that wrapped around us like a suffocating blanket. The man by the road didn't move as we passed, his face disappearing into the night behind us. I hated this. I hated feeling like prey while the hunter lurked just out of sight. All I wanted was to get home, to escape the shadows that seemed to gather around the car like vultures. The driver glanced into the rearview mirror again, his eyes catching mine for just a breath, an unsettling smile creeping onto his face. Almost there, don't worry. But as the darkness loomed ever closer, I realized that maybe my fear wasn't misplaced after all. The sun sank slowly beneath the horizon, casting a pallid orange glow over the city. I stood on the curb, feeling the chill of the approaching night creep into my bones. The air was heavy with the scent of rain that had fallen earlier, leaving the streets glistening and slick. I raised my phone, hoping to summon a taxi, yet anxiety nipped at the edges of my mind. This was the second time I had to rely on a cab in a week, and each ride had unraveled something unsettling within me. After the first incident, I had promised myself to avoid them, but the relentless grind of work had left me desperate for a ride home, and the grim reality of public transport loomed larger than the shadows gathering around me. I tapped the screen, watching the little spinning wheel of fate. It felt like an eternity before I heard the familiar rumble of an engine. A yellow cab pulled to the curb, its headlights cutting through the twilight. With a shuddering breath, I stepped inside, the warmth of the interior a stark contrast to the chill outside. "Where to?" the driver asked, his voice a low rumble. He didn't turn to look at me, staring straight ahead, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. I settled into the back seat, glancing at him in the dim light. He wore a cap pulled low, casting shadows over his face. "Downtown, please," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The sound of my own heartbeat thudded in my ears as I felt the weight of his stare bore into me. The cab lurched forward, merging into the sparse traffic. I leaned against the window, watching the city slip by in a blur of lights and shadow. A part of me tried to sink into the comfort of routine, to push away the unsettling thoughts that had accompanied me on my last ride. Yet, as the driver maneuvered through the streets, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation creeping up my spine like icy fingers. "Nice night, huh?" he said, breaking the silence. His voice was a gravelly whisper, and I forced a smile, though it felt strained. "Yeah, beautiful," I replied, staring out the window. The streetlights illuminated the sidewalks where people hurried home, their faces momentarily revealed before being swallowed by darkness. Time ticked by, the miles stretching out before us. My phone buzzed with a message from a colleague, pulling my attention from the oppressive atmosphere. I glanced at the screen, but before I could respond, I sensed a shift in the air. The driver had taken a sudden turn, one I didn't recognize, and instead of the familiar landmarks, we were surrounded by deserted streets. Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, my voice tremulous. He didn't respond. The silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the sound of the engine thrumming beneath us. I felt a prickle of fear as I leaned forward, peering through the front windshield. The street was narrow, lined with old buildings that loomed menacingly over us, their windows dark like soulless eyes. "Hey, is everything okay?" I tried again, my heart racing. He finally turned his head, the dim light revealing a face marred by deep lines and a vacant expression. His eyes were hollow, devoid of warmth or recognition. "We're taking a shortcut," he said, as if that explained everything. Panic clawed at my throat as I settled back against the seat, my mind racing with possibilities. The shortcut felt wrong, like being lured deeper into a web. I glanced at the door handle, weighing my options, but the thought of stepping out into the unknown chilled me more than my current predicament. "Can you just take me back to Fifth?" I requested, forcing the words through clenched teeth. His silence was deafening. The night outside grew darker still, and I felt the weight of dread press against my chest. The driver turned again, this time onto an even narrower alley, and I could hear the faint echo of distant laughter, high-pitched and disconcerting. It filled the air like a premonition. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, about to dial for help, when he suddenly slammed on the brakes. The car lurched forward, and I nearly collided with the partition. "Get out," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous, but I could barely comprehend the words over the rush of blood in my ears. "What?" "No!" I exclaimed, adrenaline flooding my system. He turned to face me fully, and I could see now the madness flickering in his eyes. I scrambled to unlock the door, but it was locked, the handle refusing to budge as panic surged through me. "Get out," he repeated, more forcefully this time, and I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand, a knife, or a tool of some sort. I pressed against the far side of the seat, my heart hammering in my chest as I caught a glimpse of the alley, a dark void stretching behind us, devoid of any light or hope. My mind raced through a cascade of options, but all I could focus on was escape. With a swift motion, I flicked the lock switch. The handle yielded, and I threw myself against the door, flinging it open with all my strength, propelled by pure instinct. The night air hit me like a shockwave as I stumbled onto the cold pavement. I didn't look back. I ran, the sounds of the city fading behind me, replaced by the pounding of my heart and the echo of his voice, a ghost haunting the dark recesses of my mind. The last echoes of laughter followed me like a sinister refrain, and I promised myself that I would never again trust the solace found within the shadowy confines of a taxi. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that intertwined with the creeping fog, thickening the air around me. I stood on the cracked sidewalk, shivering in the coolness of the evening. My mind replayed the events of the morning, each moment echoing louder than the last. The taxi ride, the driver's unsettling smile, the strange detour, it haunted me like a persistent whisper. I clutched my phone, its screen flickering to life as I searched for any sign of a normal cab, anything that could drive away the creeping dread that had settled in my gut. As I waited, the city transformed around me. Laughter and chatter dissipated, replaced by an eerie quiet. I glanced at my watch, urgency clawing at me. I needed to get home before the night deepened. The last thing I wanted was to encounter another driver like the one I'd had earlier. My thoughts wandered back to that man, the way his eyes glimmered in the dim light of the taxi, mirroring something both sinister and curious. I shuddered at the memory. Just then, headlights broke through the thickening fog. A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb, the engine humming softly. The driver, a middle-aged man with a cap pulled low over his brow, regarded me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was it warmth or something darker? I hesitated for a moment, but then climbed into the back seat, unwilling to be left out in the gloom any longer. "Where to?" the driver asked, his voice gravelly yet smooth, like crushed gravel underfoot. I gave him my address, my heart racing as he turned to face the street. The interior of the cab felt stifling, the air thick with the scent of stale cigarettes and something acrid. I rolled down the window slightly, the cold air rushing in, battling the oppressive atmosphere inside. As we drove, the streets shifted from familiar to strange, the buildings warping into an unfamiliar terrain. I glanced at the meter climbing steadily, anxiety knotting in my stomach. I could swear we weren't heading in the right direction. "You missed the turn back there," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Trust me," he replied, his smile widening in the rearview mirror. "You'll like the route I take." The fog thickened outside, swirling around the headlights, devouring the edges of the world beyond the glass. I shifted in my seat, unease gnawing at me. "How far is it from here?" I continued, trying to keep my tone light despite the tightening grip of fear. "Not far at all," he assured me, though his gaze seemed transfixed on the road ahead, unblinking. I studied him, trying to glean some sense of his intent. He looked ordinary enough, save for that unsettling smile. Still, an instinct warned me to tread carefully. Minutes slipped by like sand through my fingers, and the streets became increasingly desolate. I caught glimpses of shadowy figures darting into alleyways, darkened storefronts, places that felt untouched by the light of day. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, my voice firmer now. Relax. You'll see, he remarked, his tone taking on an almost sing-song quality. I felt a surge of panic. My heart raced as I leaned forward, peering out the window. All I could see were deserted streets and an ever-thickening fog that swallowed everything beyond the glow of the headlights. This isn't right, I said, my voice rising in urgency. The driver chuckled softly, but it was devoid of warmth. You're going to love it. I promise. Stop the car. I want to get out, I demanded, my hands clammy against the seat. Not yet, he replied, his voice turning cold. We're almost there. My breath quickened as adrenaline surged through me. I fumbled for my phone, but it slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor. Please, just let me out. I don't like this. The driver's laughter echoed in the cab, chilling my blood. You don't have to worry. I'm not like the others. That phrase sent a shockwave of dread coursing through me. What do you mean? The others? He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, and for a moment, I caught a reflection of something grotesque, not quite human. My stomach churned, nausea rising within me. You'll see. Just trust me. The cab jolted as he took a hard turn, and suddenly the landscape shifted. The fog parted slightly, revealing a dilapidated building looming in front of us, its windows dark, the door hanging loosely on its hinges. This was no destination, it was a trap. Stop! I screamed, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. I twisted the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic seized me as I realized he locked the doors. Let me out. He pulled the car to a stop, the engine rumbling ominously. His head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing. You're not going anywhere. I didn't have time to think. In one frantic motion, I shoved my shoulder against the door, throwing my weight into it. The door creaked and swung open, and without hesitating, I lunged into the gritty street, adrenaline fueling my flight. My heart thundered in my chest as I stumbled away from the cab, glancing back only to see him watching me, that chilling grin plastered across his face. I ran without looking back, driven by sheer instinct. The night air was cold against my skin, but the warmth of panic pushed me onward. All I could think was escape. I darted around the corner, the buildings closing in around me, shadows morphing into grotesque shapes as I raced deeper into the heart of the city, desperate for sanctuary. But the feeling of being hunted lingered, an unwelcome shadow at my heels. I had always believed that taxis were merely a means to an end. They were the yellow vessels of convenience, just a phone call away. But that night, as the city lights flickered past the windows, I began to question the safety of those unmarked cabs. The air was thick with a restless tension that pulled at my gut, making my skin prickle with unease. After everything that had happened, the strange encounters, the gnawing sense of being followed, I had hoped for a reprieve. Instead, I found myself in the back of yet another cab, a grim-looking man in a worn cap behind the wheel. He didn't speak. The cab smelled faintly of cigarettes and something else, something I couldn't quite place, but that made my stomach churn. Where to? He asked finally, his voice gruff, barely more than a whisper. Just take me home, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The thought of being alone in my apartment was a comfort, but it was also a shroud of anxiety hanging over me. The endless cycle of paranoia had begun to feel like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The cab lurched forward, and I noticed the driver's eyes darting to the rearview mirror more often than normal, sizing me up. I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of his gaze. The streets blurred past like a haunted dreamscape, the neon signs flashing in and out like warning signals. I glanced out the window, trying to lose myself in the familiarity of the city, but the buildings felt alien, as if they were leaning closer, eavesdropping on my racing thoughts. Been busy tonight? I forced a smile, my attempt at small talk falling flat. The driver grunted in response, his grip tightening around the steering wheel. A chill ran down my spine. I had learned to trust my instincts, and right now they screamed that I needed to escape. A few blocks from home, the driver took a sudden turn down a side street, one I didn't recognize. My heart raced. I think you missed my turn, I said, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. Just a shortcut, he replied, but his tone was curt, dismissive. The alleyway ahead looked like something out of a horror film, shadows twisting in the dim streetlight as they flickered ominously. Are you sure? I pressed, panic creeping up my throat like a noose. There was a heavy silence in the cab, broken only by the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. The driver didn't answer. Instead, he continued down the narrow, grimy street. I could see the outline of figures leaning against the walls, their silhouettes indistinct but decidedly menacing. I needed to get out, now. Stop the car. I shouted, my voice piercing through the oppressive silence. I want to get out here. The driver's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. They were cold and unyielding, devoid of empathy. Sit back, he growled, and with that, he accelerated. I felt the sudden surge of adrenaline as my survival instincts kicked in. I reached for the door handle, but it was locked. My fingers fumbled, panic tightening my throat as I nearly screamed. The other figures were closer now, their attention drawn to the moving vehicle. I couldn't tell if they were waiting for us or if they were simply lurking. Either way, the sense of dread was suffocating. Please, I pleaded, desperation leaking into my voice. Let me out. But he remained silent, and the cab barreled deeper into the darkness. The streetlights grew fewer, and the shadows stretched longer, creeping across the pavement like tendrils of despair. I could see a flicker of something in the distance, maybe an abandoned lot or derelict building, but I didn't want to find out what lay ahead. I twisted in my seat, ready to confront him when I saw the glint of something metallic in his lap, something sharp. In that moment, the reality of my situation crashed down upon me, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The cab jolted to a stop. My heart raced as I realized we were parked in front of a darkened warehouse, the hollow silence pressing against the air. What are you doing? I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to me slowly, a smirk creeping across his lips. You should have stayed quiet, he said, the words dripping with malice. I lunged for the door again, and this time it sprang open. I didn't think, didn't hesitate as I stumbled out into the night, my mind consumed with the instinct to survive. I heard the door slam behind me, but I didn't stop to look back. The shadows were closing in. I had to run. The warehouse loomed behind me, a gaping mouth ready to swallow me whole. I darted toward the nearest alley, the rough ground scraping against my palms as I pushed myself forward. I had no destination, only the desperate need to escape. My thoughts were a cacophony of terror and determination. I could hear him launching out of the cab, his footsteps echoing against the concrete as I veered sharply, hoping to lose him in the maze of the city. Each stride was fueled by pure survival, but the darkness felt alive, taunting me as I dashed through the shadows. I could hear his voice now, muffled but unmistakable as he shouted for me to stop. Yet I couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. As I turned another corner, my breath came in short gasps, each inhale a reminder of the price of fear. I was running from more than just a man. I was running from a nightmare that had taken form, and each heartbeat was a countdown to what might happen if I didn't escape. The city had transformed around me, no longer a safe haven but a labyrinth of horrors. I had to keep moving. I had to survive. The city had a different pulse in the early hours of morning. The streets, usually thrumming with life, had fallen silent, the only sound being the occasional rustle of leaves disturbed by a cold breeze. I stood on the corner of Maple and Fifth, the streetlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. My fingers twitched, my heart racing. I had made the decision to leave, to get away from the suffocating atmosphere of that cursed apartment. But now, as I waited for the taxi I had summoned, the darkness felt heavier than ever. I could see the headlights of the car creeping toward me, illuminating the night in a ghostly glow. My stomach knotted as I recalled the stories I had heard about rides gone wrong, but I dismissed them as paranoia. I had to get out of here. The taxi pulled up beside me, its engine rumbling like a restless beast. I opened the back door and slid inside, the scent of stale cigarettes and something chemical wrapping around me like a shroud. As I adjusted my seatbelt, the driver turned to me with a glance that sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. His eyes were dark, almost sunken, and his expression was inscrutable. "Where to?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Just take me to the bus station," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. He nodded, his eyes flickering to the rearview mirror. The cab lurched forward, and I felt the city slipping away, the structures fading into shadows behind us. The streets were mostly deserted, the only movement being the occasional flicker of a neon sign. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes, hoping that a few minutes of quiet would placate my racing thoughts. But then came the sound. A low, guttural growl emanated from the driver's throat, a noise too primal to ignore. I opened my eyes, my heart thrumming wildly against my chest. He kept his gaze fixed on the road, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Everything all right?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Traffic." He spat the word like it was poison, and I could see the tension radiating from him. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but I was trapped in a moving coffin, and the only option was to see this through. The ride dragged on, the cityscape blurring into a thread of shadows and headlights. I began to feel claustrophobic, the air heavy and suffocating. I glanced around the cab, searching for some sign of reassurance, something that would ground me back to reality. But all I saw were the worn-out leather seats and the tacky air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. The driver let out another growl, this time accompanied by a shuddering breath. "You believe in fate?" he asked, his voice suddenly calm, uncharacteristically smooth. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I guess," I finally said, my throat dry. "Fate has a funny way of bringing people together. You ever think about that?" His eyes darted to mine in the mirror, and I felt the weight of his gaze. "Not really," I replied, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a strangled gasp. He said nothing, and the silence hung between us like a thick fog. My fingers clenched the edge of the seat, and I caught a glimpse of the street signs slipping by. We were taking a route that didn't match my memory of the city. Panic pricked at the back of my mind. "Are you sure you're going the right way?" I asked, a hint of urgency creeping into my voice. "Trust me," he murmured easily, as if he had heard my fears and found them amusing. My stomach twisted. I wanted to demand that he turn back, to return me to where this nightmare had begun, but I was afraid of how he might respond. So, I stayed silent, trying to control my breathing. The air inside the cab felt electric, charged with something sinister. He turned onto a street I did not recognize, and the buildings around us grew sparse, replaced by empty lots and crumbling facades. I felt absurdly alone in that moving box, the city I had known reduced to an ominous blur. The fear was building, almost bubbling over, and I needed a way out. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Just a little detour," he replied, a hint of something darker curling in his tone. I scanned the area outside, searching for any sign of life, any flicker of hope. But there was nothing, just broken asphalt and shadows slinking in the corners of my vision, feeding the dread that coiled tighter around my chest. Suddenly, he slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the pavement. My heart leaped into my throat as I braced myself against the seat. The car lurched, and I felt the world tilt for a moment. "What are you doing?" I shouted, panic lacing my words. He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something unhinged in his eyes. "It's time to face your fate." The way he said it sent a jolt of cold down my spine. I reached for the door handle, my breath quickening. But before I could open it, he lunged toward me, his hand gripping my arm. "Don't," he hissed, his breath hot against my face. Everything in me screamed to fight, to push him away, but fear rooted me to the spot. The darkness outside seemed to close in, and I realized with dawning horror that I might not escape this time. In that moment, as his grip tightened, I understood that I had gambled with fate, and now it was collecting its due. Story 3, Echoes of the Forgotten Pines. The night wrapped itself around me like a thick fog, relentless and oppressive. I had thought the solitude of Pine Hollow National Park would bring me peace, a much-needed escape from the chaos of daily life. Instead, it felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something sinister to break the stillness. It had been 3 days since I hiked into the park, leaving behind the last signs of civilization. My phone had become a useless brick, the signal disappearing the moment I crossed the threshold into the dense trees. I found some comfort in the isolation, but as night fell, that comfort began to shift, twisting into something darker. The chill in the air seeped into my bones as I sat beside the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows that danced like specters among the trees. I poked at the embers, trying to coax warmth into my numb fingers. The crackling wood was a reassuring sound, but it could not drown out the whispers of the night. The wind rustled the branches overhead, a low murmur that felt like a warning. I glanced at the map again, its creases worn from constant unfolding. I had planned out my route meticulously, ensuring I wouldn't stray far from the main trail. But my curiosity had led me off the path, deeper into the woods, and now I was haunted by the uncertainty of my decision. As the last of the daylight faded, I pulled out my flashlight, the beam cutting a thin line through the darkness. The trees loomed, their gnarled branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal hands. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, but the stubbornness I had always possessed kept me rooted in place. I was not afraid. The stories I had heard about the park, the missing hikers, the eerie sounds at night were just that, stories. The first night had passed without incident, but the second had rattled my nerves. I heard things that shouldn't have been there, branches snapping in the distance, a low growl that seemed to come from the very earth beneath me. I dismissed them as my imagination, a trick played by the shadows. But that night, I had hardly closed my eyes, the fear pooling in my stomach like a stone. By the third night, I had grown accustomed to the sounds of the forest, or so I thought. As I sat there, the crackling of the fire alive and vibrant, I felt something shift in the atmosphere. A prickling sensation crawled along the back of my neck. I swung the flashlight around, its beam washing over the trees, but nothing moved. I thought of turning in early, of retreating into the safety of my tent. Then I heard it again, a low, rhythmic thumping, like something heavy hitting the ground. I froze, my heart pounding, every rational thought crumbling under the weight of my fear. It was coming closer. I strained to listen, the forest silent except for that rhythmic sound. My flashlight flickered, and my pulse quickened. I had not packed the supplies for an emergency. I was here to find myself, not to face whatever was lurking in the dark. I fought an urge to scream. Instead, I forced myself to breathe slowly, the fog of dread thickening around me. Just then, the sound stopped, swallowed by the night. The silence felt alive, and I could almost hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I took a deep breath and stood up, the shadows stretching around me like tendrils of darkness. I had to know what it was. Each step was deliberate, the dirt crunching beneath my boots, the flashlight beam slicing through the inky black. I moved carefully, my instincts aflame, the thumping sound still echoing in my mind. I walked deeper into the trees, feeling the air grow colder, sharper. My breath came out in small puffs, visible in the chilling night. Then, I saw it, a flash of movement. My heart stopped. Just beyond a thicket, something shifted between the trees. I raised the flashlight, my fingers trembling around the handle. The light revealed nothing but the swaying branches, but the feeling of being watched pressed down on me. I took a step back, unsure if my imagination was playing tricks or if something truly lurked in the dark. It was then that I heard it again, a voice, faint and haunting. It was a woman's voice, calling out softly, almost as if she were trying to lull someone into a sense of safety. I squinted, trying to locate its source, but I found nothing. I turned and started back toward my camp, heart racing. The voice continued, melding with the rustling leaves, beckoning me to listen. My instinct screamed for me to run, but I was drawn in, compelled by a force I didn't understand. "Help me," the voice pleaded, breaking along the edges like glass. It sent shivers down my spine. I stumbled, the beam of my flashlight wavering as panic seized me. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence enveloped me, heavy and suffocating. I turned, ready to bolt back to the firelight, but then I froze. The air around me thickened, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. I felt eyes on me, unseen watchers hidden among the trees, and suddenly, I was not just a visitor in these woods. I was prey. In the heart of Pine Hollow, I realized I was not alone, and that thought was far more terrifying than any ghost story could ever convey. The lingering scent of pine clung to my clothes like a heavy shroud, mixed with something sharper, more acrid. As I ventured deeper into the woods, echoes of my hurried breaths resonated in the silence, punctuated only by the rustle of unseen creatures. I had always believed that the wilderness offered solace, a retreat from the cacophony of city life. Now, it felt like a trap, each step taken with uncertainty, as shadows twisted and elongated in the fading light. The map I clutched in my hand was smudged and creased, its edges frayed from my anxious grasp. I had spent countless hours plotting my route through Whistler National Park, buoyed by images of breathtaking vistas and serene lakes. Those visions had now transformed into a grotesque parody of reality. The trees stood taller than I remembered, their gnarled branches stretching out like skeletal fingers, as if they were warning me to turn back. I had lost track of time. What should have been a straightforward hike to Pine Lake had morphed into a maze of indistinguishable trails and disorienting landmarks. I pressed on, the chill creeping into my bones as the sun dipped below the horizon. A peculiar stillness enveloped the forest, a silence that felt charged with an unseen tension. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a sturdy oak. My eyes scanned the underbrush, searching for movement, anything that might reassure me I wasn't alone. The thought of solitude had once been comforting, but now it was a reminder of my vulnerability. An eerie chill danced along my spine as I recalled the stories I'd heard at the ranger station, hikers who had vanished without a trace, whispers of something lurking in the dense undergrowth. Just as I began to convince myself that it was foolish to let fear take hold, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. My heart raced, and instinctively I turned toward the noise. The shadows seemed to deepen, the darkness pressing in around me. I took a hesitant step forward, compelled by curiosity but gripped by dread. The underbrush parted to reveal a narrow path I hadn't noticed before, overgrown and barely visible. I hesitated, unsure if I should follow it, but the unsettling urge to know propelled me onward. The air grew colder as I ventured down the trail, my senses heightened, each sound amplified in the oppressive quiet. The branches clawed at my skin, and I felt the weight of countless eyes watching from the shadows. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon something that sent a jolt of horror coursing through my veins. A makeshift campsite lay abandoned before me, its presence unexpected and out of place in the wild. Torn tents sagged under the weight of fallen leaves, and remnants of a fire pit sat cold and empty, stones coated in soot. My heart fluttered with unease. It was clear this site hadn't been used in a long time. The neglect felt heavy, as if the earth itself wanted to reclaim what had once belonged to it. I approached slowly, scanning the area for any signs of life. A rusted pot lay tipped over, and the remnants of a half-burnt log suggested it had been used for cooking. My eyes were drawn to a tattered journal that lay tucked beneath a rock. I knelt, hesitating only for a moment before reaching for it. The cover was stained and weathered, but the pages inside were surprisingly intact. The entries began innocuously enough, detailing the author's excitement about their trip, the beauty of the park, and the hope of encountering wildlife. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. Descriptions of unease crept into the narrative. The writer spoke of strange noises echoing through the night, of shadows that moved without a source. Their last entry sent chills down my spine, the ink smudged as if the writer had hurried to conclude their thoughts. Something is watching. I can feel it. We're not alone. I felt the weight of the words hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. I hurriedly closed the journal, casting a wary glance over my shoulder, almost expecting to see someone or something lurking just beyond the trees. My stomach knotted with dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in a place that was not meant for me, a place where the forest held its secrets close, tightly woven into its fabric. I stood to leave, but the growing darkness disoriented me, the trees shifting in unfamiliar patterns. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the panic rising in my chest. It would be foolish to linger. Turning back would mean retracing my steps through the oppressive gloom, but staying felt equally perilous. As I moved away from the campsite, the air grew heavier, thick with an unshakable presence. Suddenly, a branch snapped loudly behind me. I turned, but nothing stirred. My heart raced as I fled down the path, the ground uneven beneath my feet. I stumbled, adrenaline surging, but I didn't dare look back. The shadows danced around me, their forms shifting and twisting, and in that moment, I understood that the forest had its own pulse, its own intent. The wild had a way of consuming those who ventured too deep, and I felt like prey in an ancient game. I ran, my breath ragged and shallow, unaware of what or who might be following me in the gloom. The trees blurred into a dark wall as I dashed forward, desperate for any sign of familiarity. I was lost, truly lost, and the realization sank into my bones like a bitter chill. The world around me had transformed into a labyrinth of nightmare, and I was just another unfortunate soul caught in its grip. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced among the towering pines. The stillness of the park was suddenly unsettling, as if the trees themselves whispered secrets I was not meant to overhear. I had spent the day mapping out trails, my only company the distant calls of birds and the rustling leaves, but as night encroached, I felt the weight of solitude pressing down on me. I set up camp near a small clearing, convinced that the night air would fill my lungs with the freshness of the forest. With each rustle of the underbrush, I told myself it was just a squirrel or an unsuspecting deer. But the chirping crickets had quieted, replaced by an eerie silence that settled like a heavy blanket. As I lit a small fire, the flames flickered uncertainly, casting an orange glow that barely penetrated the darkness. I reached for my backpack, pulling out the journal I had brought along. The pages were filled with sketches and ideas, my thoughts racing from one adventure to the next. I tried to focus on the beauty of the park, but the creeping sensation that I was not alone gnawed at the edge of my mind. Just as I began to write, I heard a soft snapping sound from behind the trees. My pen froze above the page, heart thudding wildly against my rib cage. I peered into the blackness, but saw nothing. I wanted to dismiss it as an animal, but my instincts told me otherwise. The wind picked up, rustling the branches and carrying a strange scent, something rancid, like decaying leaves. I shook my head, trying to clear the thickening fog of dread. Surely, it was just the remnants of the day's rain mingling with the forest floor. I had always believed in the stories of national park horrors, lost hikers, strange disappearances, and unfathomable encounters with the unknown. I had studied them, fascinated and repulsed in equal measure. Yet, they had always felt distant, mere flights of fancy, until now. The stories whispered through the trees, echoed in the rustling grass, and I could feel an unseen presence looming just beyond the firelight. I stood, forcing my feet to move as I went to retrieve a couple of logs for the fire. The snap of twig beneath my boots sounded far too loud. I kept my gaze forward, focused on the warmth of the fire, but as I bent low to add the wood, a shiver crept up my spine. I sensed it again, a gaze from behind, heavy and penetrating. I straightened, scanning the tree line. Nothing but shadows. I cursed myself for being so jumpy, but the air held a tension that made my skin crawl. I returned to my seat, deliberately keeping my gaze away from the dark woods, telling myself it was just my imagination. The fire crackled as I leaned closer, letting the heat wash over me. Minutes passed. Then the silence was broken, not by the forest but by a voice, faint and drifting on the wind. It was a child's voice. The sound sent an icy jolt through my body. It was a haunting lullaby that echoed through the trees, sweet and sorrowful. I strained to listen, heart racing. The voice called out again, clearer this time, wrapping around me like smoke. "Help me." I jumped to my feet, eyes wide and scanning the darkness. I had heard what I thought was a voice, but it couldn't possibly be. I felt foolish for considering it, but the call grew louder, more insistent. "Help me." The urge to flee clawed at me. Yet, part of me was drawn to the sound, an insatiable curiosity mingled with fear propelling me forward. I grabbed a flashlight, uncertain, but I couldn't just ignore it. I took a cautious step beyond the firelight, illuminating the trees ahead. "Hello?" I called, the word trembling as it left my lips. "Is anyone there?" My voice echoed back, swallowed by the darkness. Nothing responded but the rustling leaves and the fading lullaby. I walked deeper into the woods, each step feeling heavier than the last. The flashlight beam pierced the darkness, revealing nothing but gnarled roots and shadowy underbrush. I chided myself for being reckless, for thinking there might be a child lost in the woods. Yet the voice lingered, flickering like the dying embers of my fire. I moved further in, the oppressive darkness closing around me. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. A chill swept through the air, and I stopped, heart racing. The sensation of being watched washed over me once more. I swung the flashlight around but found nothing. Then, from somewhere far away, I heard it again. "Help me." The voice was stronger now, almost as if it was coming from right behind me. Ice coursed through my veins. I turned, but found only the trees, their branches twisted in the pale moonlight. I needed to go back. The fire, my camp, it was safety. With a surge of panic, I turned on my heel and fled, branches snagging at my clothes and the darkness enveloping me like a shroud. My breath came in short gasps, the cold air stinging my lungs as I stumbled through the underbrush, panic tightening my chest. I finally broke back into the clearing, the flickering fire offering a semblance of comfort. I collapsed beside it, my hands shaking as I tried to catch my breath. I had convinced myself it was just a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The woods were alive with their own horrors, and I had unwittingly entered their domain. The fire crackled, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. The shadows shifted, taking forms I could barely comprehend. I grabbed a stick and poked the flames, desperately trying to keep the fire alive. It would keep me safe. I had to believe that. But the voice lingered in my mind. Help me. It resonated through the dark, a chilling refrain I could not escape, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had only just begun to scratch the surface of the nightmare that lurked in the depths of the national park. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting elongated shadows that twisted between the trees, an ominous reminder of the encroaching night. The forest was alive with sounds, a rustling of leaves overhead, the distant call of a bird, and the soft crunch of twigs beneath my boots. I had hoped to find comfort in the familiar, but my surroundings felt foreign, as if the woods themselves whispered secrets I was never meant to hear. After the incident with Anna, I had spent the better part of the morning in a haze, replaying her last words in my mind. She had insisted something was wrong, that the forest was not what it seemed. I had dismissed her fears as mere paranoia, the product of an overactive imagination fed by stories of missing hikers and ghostly encounters. But as the day wore on and the shadows deepened, her words took root, growing into a gnawing dread. I decided to head back to the campsite, but the path I had taken earlier felt unfamiliar, twisted beyond recognition. The trees loomed overhead, their branches curling like fingers against the approaching twilight. I stopped, trying to calm my racing heart. The air felt thick and heavy, as though the very atmosphere was charged with a tension I couldn't quite identify. The trail forked ahead, one side leading deeper into the woods, while the other appeared to head back toward familiar territory. Despite every instinct in my body urging me to choose the well-trodden path, curiosity pulled me toward the darker trail. It was a decision I would come to regret. As I ventured deeper, the sun's rays filtered through the branches less and less, casting me into a twilight world that smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. I shivered despite the warmth of the air. The sounds of the forest shifted, the chirping of birds quieted, replaced by an unsettling silence that gnawed at my nerves. I paused, listening intently. That was when I first heard it, a soft, rhythmic thumping, like heavy footsteps. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The noise was faint but unmistakable, echoing through the trees. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Anna behind me, but the path was empty and still. I pressed on, determined to discover the source of the sound. Each step felt like wading through molasses, each crunch of leaves beneath my feet louder than the last. The thumping grew louder, accompanied now by a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the air, sending shivers down my spine. Panic surged through me. I turned to leave, heart racing as I retraced my steps, but the path I had come from seemed to dissolve into an endless maze of trunks and branches. Frantic now, I stumbled forward, desperately seeking any sign of familiarity. The thumping persisted, growing more insistent, and I could feel it resonating in my bones. I pushed through the underbrush, branches clawing at my arms, my breath quickening as I realized I was utterly lost. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned, and there, just beyond the trees, was a figure. It stood unnaturally still, its silhouette obscured by the shadows. A sudden rush of adrenaline propelled me forward. I wanted to call out, to see if it was someone else lost in the woods, but the words caught in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to run. But run where? The forest had morphed into a labyrinth, each tree and bush indistinguishable from the last. I took a step back, my foot snagging on a root, sending me sprawling to the ground. I scrambled to regain my footing, breathless, when I heard the growl again, closer this time. Panic set in, and I bolted in what I hoped was the right direction. The thumping quickened, a relentless pursuit that filled my ears with dread. I glanced back, catching a fleeting glimpse of the figure. It was large, its eyes gleaming like two burning coals in the fading light. I stumbled into a clearing, breathless and disoriented, the moonlight now a thin crescent hanging ominously above. I looked around, desperate for anything that resembled a path, when I noticed something odd. Scattered across the ground were remnants of what seemed like an old campsite, tattered tents, rusted cans, and a makeshift fire pit, the stones arranged in a crude circle. But the chilling realization came when I noticed the bones, small and large, bleached white like sun-bleached driftwood, littering the clearing. I froze, the horror of it sinking in. This place was not abandoned, it was a graveyard, a hidden monument to those who had come before me. My heart raced, and panic clawed at my throat as the growl reverberated again, now unmistakably close. I turned, my instinct screaming at me to flee. But in my desperation, I had lost all sense of direction. The familiar trees had become grotesque, their twisted forms reaching for me like skeletal hands. I heard the thumping again, heavy, relentless, echoing my own frantic heartbeat. I stumbled backward, and that was when I saw it fully. The figure stepped into the moonlight, a monstrous shape with matted fur and gleaming eyes, a primal snarl twisting its mouth. It stood on two legs, towering over me, a grotesque mockery of humanity. My breath caught, and I turned to run, not looking back, the forest closing in around me as I fled into the darkness. I could hear it behind me, the heavy sound of its pursuit, growing closer with each step. The forest had transformed from a sanctuary into a nightmare, and I was no longer just lost, I was hunted. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the dense trees of Blackwood National Park enveloped me in an oppressive darkness. I had always loved this place, its towering pines and the way the underbrush seemed to breathe with life. But on this evening, the forest felt like a cage, its shadows encroaching as I stumbled through the uneven terrain. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the chill creeping up my spine. I clutched the small flashlight I had found in my backpack, its beam flickering as I fought to maintain my sense of direction. The events of the past few days replayed relentlessly in my mind. I could still hear Rachel's screams as she was pulled into the woods, her silhouette swallowed by the trees, never to be seen again. I had spent every waking hour searching for her, retracing her steps, but hope was thinning like the last light of day. Panic began to claw at me. Each rustle in the underbrush seemed amplified, a creature lurking just out of sight. I stopped, listening intently, half expecting the whispers of the forest to reveal a hidden truth or perhaps the spectral echo of Rachel's voice. The wind sighed ominously, and I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping dread that wrapped around me like a shroud. I pressed forward, my mind racing. I knew I shouldn't have ventured this far alone, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to find her, to know what had happened. My heart pounded as I recalled the strange markings I had seen on the trees days earlier, dark scratches that almost looked like claw marks. The park ranger had brushed them off, chalking it up to bears or other wildlife, but I felt in my gut that something was terribly wrong. As night fell, the woods transformed. The rustling leaves felt sinister, and the distance seemed to warp, making the trees loom closer. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a clearing I didn't recognize. The moon shone down in fractured beams, illuminating a circle of stones at the center. They looked ancient, almost ritualistic, like something right out of a horror movie. Unease washed over me, and I cautiously approached. I knelt beside the stones, tracing my fingers over the rough surface. It was colder than the surrounding ground. Just then, I heard a noise, a sharp snap of twigs behind me. I whipped around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly, but found only the thick shadows. My breath quickened, and I backed away from the stones, unease tightening my throat. But then, a flicker of movement caught my eye at the edge of the clearing, something darting between the trees. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but I was frozen. I squinted into the darkness, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure, slender and tall, with elongated limbs that moved unnaturally, as if it were part of the forest itself. It vanished before my mind could grasp its details, and I felt a cold sweat bead at my temples. In that moment of hesitation, the urge to run consumed me. I turned and sprinted back into the woods, branches clawing at my clothes as I tore through the underbrush. My heart thundered in my chest, and every sound seemed to conspire against me. The wind shrieked, and a low growl reverberated deep within the trees. I had no idea where I was headed. I simply needed to escape. As I stumbled deeper into the woods, I tripped on a root and fell hard onto the forest floor. Pain shot through my ankle as I twisted to get up, the flashlight skidding away from my grasp. In the pitch black, I could hear my breath ringing in my ears, but I didn't dare to let the darkness swallow me. I groped blindly for the flashlight, my fingers trembling as they grazed the cool surface. I picked it up and flicked it on, the beam cutting through the black like a knife. My heart sank as it illuminated the surrounding trees. I was surrounded, branches twisted in grotesque shapes, shadows that resembled faces, their mouths open in silent screams. I struggled to my feet, and as I did, I heard it again, the snapping of twigs, this time closer. I could feel it, whatever it was, lurking just beyond the reach of my light. Adrenaline surged through me as I turned, searching for a way out. I couldn't let it take me like it had taken Rachel. I ran in what felt like an endless circle, my breath ragged, the underbrush tearing at my clothing. Every time I turned, I thought I saw something watching me, its eyes reflecting the light like a predator in the dark. Was it the creature I had glimpsed earlier? Or was it something worse, an embodiment of the forest's wrath? Finally, I burst into another clearing, or rather, a small grove where the trees opened just enough to allow the moonlight to flood in. My pulse slowed momentarily as I took in the sight, but the relief was short-lived. The ground was littered with bones, animal remains scattered like macabre decorations. I stumbled back, stomach twisting as a sickening realization hit me. This was a graveyard, a place where the forest buried its secrets. I heard the noise again, low and guttural. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but my legs felt like lead. With nowhere to go, I fell to my knees among the bones, the moon casting down a cold light over the scene. I was painfully aware of the darkness lurking at the edge of the grove. Then it emerged. A figure, impossibly tall with elongated limbs, stepped into the clearing. Its eyes glowed like embers, a cruel smile etched across its face. The forest fell silent, the wind holding its breath as it loomed closer. The weight of despair pressed down on me, and I realized I was no longer searching for Rachel, I was the one being hunted. In that moment, I understood that Blackwood National Park was alive, and it had no intention of letting me leave. Story 4: Echoes of the Forgotten Cabin. I had always thought of myself as a pragmatic person, grounded in reason and logic, but the moment I turned off the winding dirt road leading into the woods, a sliver of doubt crept into my chest. It was supposed to be a weekend retreat, an escape from the clamor of city life to recharge my weary mind. I pictured myself sipping coffee on the cabin porch, taking leisurely strolls through the towering pines, and finding solace in the embrace of nature. Yet, as the trees closed in on either side, I couldn't shake the feeling that these woods were hiding something beneath their tranquil surface. The cabin came into view as I rounded a final bend, an unassuming structure nestled among the trees, its weathered wood blending into the landscape. It looked like something out of a postcard, picturesque and serene, but my heart raced for reasons I couldn't understand. I parked the car and stepped out, the crisp air filling my lungs, mingling with the faint scent of pine needles and damp earth. The solitude felt heavy, wrapping around me like a thick blanket. I walked toward the cabin, my footsteps muffled by the soft earth. It was a simple place, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room that boasted a quaint fireplace. I dropped my bags in the small entryway and moved to the window, peering out at the surrounding woods. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets in the fading light. As I settled in, I tried to shake off the creeping unease. I busied myself with unpacking, reminding myself why I had come. The city felt like a lifetime away, and I welcomed the promise of solitude. I headed outside to the porch, where a rickety wooden chair beckoned me to sit and breathe in the quiet. But the silence was unsettling, almost oppressive. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone, a hiker, perhaps emerging from the woods. Yet I was utterly alone. I pulled out my phone to snap a few pictures, capturing the cabin's charm, but the device flashed a message, no service. My stomach twisted at the realization. I was truly cut off. Evening settled in quickly, and I felt the eerie shift in the air. Shadows deepened, and the woods seemed to draw closer, the trees towering like dark sentinels. I made a fire, comforting at first, but as the flames flickered, I felt the warmth retreat against an unseen chill. The crackling wood was the only sound, blending with the rustling leaves, which now felt like murmurs. I chuckled nervously, convincing myself it was just my imagination. After a simple dinner of soup, I turned off the lights, opting to embrace the darkness that enveloped the cabin. The fire's glow gave way to shadows that danced along the walls, twisting into shapes that threatened to become more than mere shadows. I pulled a blanket tightly around my shoulders and lost myself in a book, but the words swam before my eyes. I glanced around, half expecting something to appear, a figure lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight. It wasn't until the wind picked up, howling through the treetops, that I felt a real jolt of fear. A sound broke through the stillness, a low, elongated moan, echoing through the woods. My heart thrummed in my chest. It was unlike any animal noise I had heard before, almost human. I set the book down, straining to listen. The sound resonated again, closer, settling like ice in my veins. I stood, moving to the window, my eyes darting through the darkness. The trees swayed ominously, and I could have sworn I saw movement, a fleeting shadow just beyond the clearing. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the image. It was just wildlife, I told myself. I returned to my seat but found it impossible to concentrate, my mind racing through scenarios. What if someone was out there? What if they needed help? The fire sputtered, casting eerie shapes on the walls, and every crackle felt like a warning. I forced my gaze back to the pages of my book, but the words blurred along with my focus. Then the noise came again, a short, desperate cry that sliced through the night. I felt my breath hitch. This time, it was unmistakably human. Panic surged within me, and I grabbed a flashlight from my bag, fumbling as I flipped it on. The beam pierced the darkness, revealing nothing but the familiar shadows of the trees and the silhouette of the cabin. I took a breath, willing myself to calm down. It could be a prank, some teenagers playing tricks to scare the unsuspecting city dweller. Gathering what little courage I had, I stepped outside, the cool air biting at my skin. The woods loomed, thick and foreboding, but curiosity pulled me deeper. I wandered a few paces into the trees, my heart pounding louder than the rustling leaves. The flashlight's beam wavered, illuminating space enough to see, but it felt like the shadows were crawling closer, eager to swallow me whole. "Hello?" I called into the night, my voice steady despite the tremor inside. There was only silence in return, a heavy stillness that hung like a shroud. I turned to go back, but then I heard it again, a soft whimper, twisting through the air like a ghostly lament. Something was out there, somewhere in the depths of the woods, and I was unprepared for what I might find. With dread pooling in my stomach, I stepped further into the darkness, drawn by the sound, the instinct to help battling with a primal urge to flee. The trees stood like giants around me, their bark seeming to twist and contort in the dim light, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching, waiting. Whatever I was about to uncover might shatter the facade of normalcy I had clung to all weekend. Something was coming for me, and I was helpless to stop it. I had always imagined the woods as a place of tranquility, a setting for contemplation and peace. But as I emerged from the confines of the cabin, I felt the air nodding around me, thick and heavy as if it bore witness to my dread. The sunlight barely filtered through the dense canopy above, casting long shadows across the forest floor. A hummingbird flitted past, a fleeting splash of color against an otherwise monochrome backdrop. I heard the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a crow, and realized then that I was not alone. The cabin had seemed a sanctuary upon my arrival, a rustic escape from the clamor of city life. But now, standing on the creaking porch, I could sense an underlying tension that gnawed at my nerves. The previous night, I had felt the weight of unseen eyes watching me, but morning light had chased some of that darkness away. Or so I thought. I wanted to dismiss the feeling. Maybe it was just a figment of an overactive imagination fueled by too many horror movies. I hadn't slept well. Shadows had danced along the walls of the cabin, and the floorboards had creaked ominously with each gust of wind. Perhaps it was the oppressive solitude that stirred a primal fear within me. The vastness of the forest seemed to amplify my disquiet. I ventured deeper into the woods, each step muted by layers of foliage that crunched softly underfoot. I was searching for clarity, a distraction from the uneasy feeling that gripped me. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting together, creating a web of shadows that seemed to swallow me whole. A chill slithered down my spine, and I turned to glance back at the cabin, its worn exterior now appearing more ominous than ever. Hours drifted by as I walked further, my attention drawn to strange sounds, a snapping twig, a whisper of wind that felt almost like a voice. I paused, trying to convince myself it was merely nature at work, but every creak and rustle seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I pressed on, determined to quell my growing apprehension. As I walked, I stumbled upon a narrow path, overtaken by weeds and ferns. Curiosity tugged at me, and I followed it deeper into the thicket. The further I strayed from the cabin, the more I felt the shadows closing in around me. I started to doubt my decision to come here. Alone. In the middle of nowhere. After what felt like an eternity, I found myself in a small clearing. It was eerily serene, sunlight filtering through the leaves, illuminating a patch of soft grass in the center. I took a moment to catch my breath, listening to the silence that enveloped me. The stillness was both comforting and unsettling. It felt as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That's when I heard it again, the rustling. This time, it was closer. My heart raced as I turned around slowly, scanning the edge of the clearing. Nothing. Just trees. But the air seemed charged, alive with tension, and I felt exposed, vulnerable. I backed away, inching toward the path I had come from, when I caught a glimpse of something moving behind the trees, a flicker of motion that sent my heart into a frenzy. I squinted, trying to focus on the shadows that danced at the edge of my vision. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted in place, caught between fight and flight. And then, amidst the rustling leaves, I saw it, a figure, pale and gaunt, peering from behind a tree. Its eyes, hollow and dark, locked onto mine, and I felt a jolt of terror surge through my veins. I turned and bolted, fear propelling my legs as I sprinted down the path. The branches snagged at my clothes, tearing at my skin like hungry claws. I couldn't shake the sense that it was behind me, pursuing me through the labyrinth of trees. Panic surged, my breath came in ragged gasps, and I dared not look back. As I broke through the tree line, the cabin stood before me like a sanctuary, but it felt tainted now. I raced up the steps, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. My chest heaved as I pressed myself against the door, straining to listen for any signs of pursuit. Silence enveloped me, but it was a deafening kind of quiet, punctuated only by my racing heartbeat. I stumbled away from the door, leaning against the wall, the reality of what I had seen crashing over me like a wave. I couldn't shake the image of those hollow eyes, the strange figure that had emerged from the shadows. There had to be an explanation, a rational reason for what I had experienced. But deep down, I knew I had unearthed something unsettling within these woods. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows that crept toward the cabin. I felt the walls closing in, the air thickening around me. I needed to leave, to escape this oppressive sense of dread. But something deep within me resisted, a morbid curiosity that tethered me to the very place I longed to flee. As the light waned, I made my way to a window, peering out into the encroaching darkness, half expecting to see that figure lurking just beyond the threshold. But the woods were still, eerily quiet, as if the forest held its breath once more. I wondered then what other secrets lay hidden in its depths, waiting to be uncovered. The sun dipped below the horizon, drowning the forest in shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the ground. I paced inside the cabin, the wooden walls creaking softly, as if they were whispering secrets to one another while I tried to process the day's escalating strangeness. What was supposed to be a calming retreat far from the chaos of city life had turned into a suffocating prison of uncertainty. After discovering the rusted axe and the strange, half-buried bones outside, unease had settled over me like a thick fog. I had convinced myself that it was just my imagination running wild. Perhaps the previous owners had left the axe behind and some animal had met an unfortunate end nearby. Yet, as I picked at the edges of my thoughts, I felt a gnawing fear that something was terribly wrong. The walls felt like they were closing in as I tried to focus on the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows around the room. The cabin was sparse, containing little more than a rickety table and 2 chairs that creaked in protest when I shifted my weight. A small fireplace, now cold, loomed in the corner, and I glanced toward it, my mind wandering to the last time it had seen warmth. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding into a space where I did not belong. I had turned my phone on earlier, desperate for some connection to the outside world, but it had betrayed me with a glaring absence of signal. I had tried calling Mike, my friend back in the city, but all I got was a dead silence that echoed back in my ears. As night came, so did the realization that I was utterly alone, with no help in sight. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, a low hum that sent shivers up my spine. I paced back to the window, peering out into the thickening darkness. The trees loomed like sentinels, their branches swaying ominously. I felt as though they were watching me, judging my presence in their realm. I turned away sharply, pushing the window shut and bolting it, a futile attempt to drown out the rising tide of dread. Hours dragged on, and the shadows deepened around me. I forced myself to light a fire, feeling a desperate need for warmth and light. As the flames crackled and danced, a strange comfort enveloped me, but it was fleeting. The fire did not rid me of the nagging sensation that I was not, in fact, alone. A sudden noise broke the stillness, a low thud against the cabin wall. I froze, heart pounding. I waited, listening intently, straining to catch the sound again. Seconds passed like hours, and I was left with nothing but the dull throb of my pulse in my ears. Just as I began to convince myself it was nothing, it came again, louder this time. A chill raced down my spine. I grabbed a rusty axe, its weight oddly reassuring in my hands. I approached the door, every instinct screaming at me to retreat, but curiosity propelled me forward. The handle felt cold against my palm, and I hesitated, wondering if I was about to make a grave mistake. With a deep breath, I flung the door open. The night air hit me with a wave of cold, and the shadows danced wildly around the cabin. I stepped outside, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness. The beam landed on the trees, their trunks gnarled and twisted, casting grotesque shapes on the ground. Then, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of my light. It was too far to make out any detail, but the chill of recognition clawed at my throat. I blinked hard, trying to discern if it was merely a trick of the light or something far more sinister. "Hello?" My voice trembled, swallowed by the stillness. No response came, only the rustling of leaves as if the forest itself were holding its breath. I took a shaky step closer, the axe feeling heavy in my grip. The figure remained motionless, staring back at me. I felt my heart race, caught between the urge to flee and the need to confront whatever nightmare awaited. But before I could decide, it turned abruptly and vanished into the woods, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I stumbled back, tripping over the threshold of the cabin, barely catching myself as a wave of fear washed over me. What had I just seen? With trembling hands, I shut the door and locked it once more, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I leaned against the cool wood, trying to process the encounter. The fire flickered weakly behind me, offering small comfort against the encroaching darkness. What had I stumbled into? The weight of the axe felt burdensome now, as if it held the secrets of the cabin in its rusted blade. I sank into one of the chairs, staring into the flames, hoping they would reveal the truth behind that fleeting figure. As the minutes passed, the cabin felt more like a tomb than a refuge. The shadows morphed around me, twisting and turning, as if they were alive. I tried to shake it off, to dismiss my mind's spiraling thoughts, but the cabin had awakened something primal within me, a fear as ancient as the trees themselves. In the silence, I could swear I heard whispers, echoing in the stillness. They beckoned to me, teasing at the fringes of my understanding, urging me to look deeper into the shadows. I wanted to shut them out, to deny their existence, but curiosity tugged at me, insisting I uncover whatever secrets lay hidden in the dark. With a heavy heart and a light that was fading, I knew I had to take that step. The cabin was alive with something more than just echoes of the past. It called to me, and I was too drawn in to resist. I steeled myself, rising from the chair, the axe now feeling less like a tool for protection and more like a key to unlock whatever horrors awaited me outside. The sun was a pale memory behind the thick blanket of clouds that hung over the forest. I had spent the better part of the morning pacing the confines of the cabin, my mind a whirlwind of disoriented thoughts. The chill that seeped through the cracks in the walls felt like a steady reminder that I was alone, stranded in this desolate place. The surrounding trees whispered secrets to one another, their branches creaking like old bones as the wind rustled through them, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were listening. After the incident with the old journal, a discovery that had unsettled me more than I wished to admit, I turned my focus to the cabin itself. The walls bore marks, not just from age, but from something darker. I ran my fingers over the wooden beams, tracing paths worn by the hands of past occupants. Each groove and scratch seemed to tell a story, but what stories did they hold? Had they, too, felt the despair that had begun to seep into my bones? I decided to gather my courage and explore the small rooms I had previously avoided. The first room off the main living area, the kitchen, was almost intact. A rusted stove sat against the far wall, and a worn table stood in the center, its surface marred by deep divots and stains I dared not ponder. The only sign of life was a family of mice scurrying beneath the cabinet, their small movements sending a jolt of unease through me. I backed out of the kitchen, unwilling to linger in that space filled with forgotten meals and tainted memories. The other door led to a narrow hallway. I hesitated as I reached the threshold, but curiosity propelled me forward. The hallway branched out to two rooms. One was likely a bedroom, the other a storage space. I opened the door to the bedroom first. Dust motes danced in the filtered light, and a lone bed frame lay in the corner, stripped of linens. The mattress had long since succumbed to decay, sagging in on itself like a forgotten promise. My heart raced as I stepped inside, acutely aware of the unsettling quiet that enveloped me. A small trunk rested at the foot of the bed, its latch rusted shut. Despite my fear, I knelt before it, feeling an inexplicable urge to uncover whatever lay within. With a deep breath, I fumbled with the latch until it finally clicked open. The lid creaked as I lifted it, revealing a collection of brittle letters and tattered photographs, their edges curled and faded. I picked one up, recognizing the faces, smiling, carefree. Yet the dim light in the cabin cast a shadow over them, amplifying the eeriness of their expressions. I felt an overwhelming urge to look away, as though the photographs possessed a dark energy that threatened to ensnare me. Outside, a gust of wind howled, prompting me to slam the trunk shut. I was losing my nerve. With shaking hands, I turned to leave the bedroom, but as I did, I noticed a figure pass by the cracked window. My breath hitched in my throat. I froze, straining to catch another glimpse. The woods were supposed to be empty, right? My thoughts raced with possibilities. Had someone followed me? The remnants of past visitors? Or was it something far more sinister? I crept back to the window, heart pounding against my ribs, and peered through the grime-streaked glass. No one was there. Just trees, their twisted branches reaching out like ghostly fingers. I chided myself for being jumpy and brushed it off as a trick of the eye. Yet a sense of dread coiled tight within me, settling heavily in my stomach. I returned to the main room, desperate for clarity. The feeling of being watched clung to me, and an oppressive silence filled the cabin like an unwelcome guest. I was about to sit down when a loud thud echoed from the direction of the hallway. I jumped, adrenaline surging through me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. Just the rustling of leaves outside and the creaking of the cabin settling deeper into the earth. I felt drawn back to the hallway, a magnetic pull urging me to uncover the source of the noise. I tread carefully, half expecting another sound to ring out. The anticipation thickened the air around me, and I could almost taste the fear. As I reached the end of the hallway, I discovered the storage room door slightly ajar. I had not noticed it before. My heart sank. I pushed the door open, the hinges protesting loudly, and was met by darkness. I fumbled for a light switch that wasn't there, switching on my phone flashlight instead. The beam cut through the blackness, illuminating shelves lined with old tools, jars filled with murky substances, and a large, dusty mirror leaning against the far wall. In an attempt to steady my nerves, I laughed softly, but the sound felt foreign in the suffocating silence. I stepped further inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. As my light flickered across the room, I caught sight of a dark shape against the mirror's surface. I squinted, my breath hitching again. The mirror was clouded, but I could make out something moving behind me, or was it inside the reflection, perhaps? Before I could analyze it further, the flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone. When I turned it back on, the light returned, but it felt weaker now, trembling as my fingers shook. The shape was gone. I hurried to the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it, the sound reverberating through the small space. I was trapped. The moon hung high in the sky, a waning crescent that struggled to push through the thick layer of clouds. I sat on the rickety porch of the cabin, the wood creaking beneath my weight as I stared into the blackness of the woods that surrounded me. The night felt heavier, oppressive, as though the trees were closing in, whispering secrets I couldn't grasp. I had not seen Steve and Emily since the incident. After they ventured out to gather firewood, a gnawing fear settled in my stomach. Hours had slipped away, the chill of the night creeping into my bones. I should have gone looking for them, but I felt rooted to the porch, a mix of dread and paralyzing uncertainty keeping me still. Every snap of a twig sent a shiver racing down my spine, a reminder that something was wrong, deeply wrong. The pale light from the cabin flickered, casting erratic shadows across the porch. I brushed a hand through my hair, feeling the sticky perspiration on my forehead. I thought of the strange noises I had heard earlier, the rustling that had set my heart racing. It had sounded like an animal at first, but there was something else layered within those sounds, something almost human. I had dismissed the thought as panic, but now it echoed in my mind, taunting me. I took a deep breath, adrenaline coursing through me. I could no longer sit idly by. I stepped into the cabin, the thick air swirling around me as I grabbed a flashlight from the dining table. The beam flickered as I switched it on, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I focused on the door that led to the darkened woods. It felt like a portal to another world, one I was reluctant to enter. "Come on, guys," I muttered under my breath, though I didn't expect a response. The silence felt slow, suffocating, wrapping around me like a thick fog. I gripped the flashlight tightly, feeling the cold metal against my palm, and stepped outside. The crunch of leaves beneath my feet echoed too loudly in my ears. I walked cautiously, listening intently for any signs of life beyond my own. Shadows loomed, stretching and shifting as the beam of light swept across the underbrush. I called out their names, my voice trembling as it echoed into the night. Steve. Emily. Each syllable felt heavy, as if the woods were swallowing them before they reached their intended ears. The further I ventured, the more the trees seemed to close in. It was as if they had a life of their own, twisting and curling, hiding whatever lay in their depths. I recalled the local lore, the warnings about the woods. Tales of those who had gone in and never returned. I pushed those thoughts aside, forcing myself to concentrate. I had to find them. They had to be okay. A sudden rustle to my left made me freeze. I turned the flashlight, heart pounding, illuminating a patch of brush. A rabbit darted away, and I sighed in relief. But as I resumed my search, the feeling of being watched returned, prickling my skin. I hurried on, desperation clawing at my throat. I arrived at the clearing, the place where Steve and Emily had gathered before. It was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the cacophony of sounds I had grown accustomed to in the cabin. I scanned the area, looking for any sign of them, but all I found were the remains of the twigs they had gathered, haphazardly strewn about. Guys. My voice cracked, the words swallowed by the stillness. I felt the hollow ache in my chest deepen. They were supposed to be here. They couldn't just vanish. I stepped further into the clearing, and then I saw it, a dark shape at the edge of the trees. I froze, heart racing, breath coming in quick bursts. Could it be them? No, it didn't move like a person. It crouched low, blending into the shadows. I squinted, trying to make sense of the silhouette. It stirred slightly, and a chill gripped my spine. There was something profoundly wrong about its shape, as if nature itself had twisted into a grotesque parody of life. With trembling hands, I raised the flashlight, illuminating the figure. My breath caught in my throat. It was not Steve or Emily. Instead, it was a creature long-limbed, with skin that glistened in the faint light. Its eyes glowed, reflecting the beam like two burning coals. I stumbled backward, fear paralyzing me. The creature tilted its head, a mocking gesture that made my stomach churn. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of sharp teeth that seemed to stretch too wide for its face. A low growl rumbled from its throat, an unnatural sound that resonated deep within me. I turned to flee, adrenaline surging through my veins. As I sprinted back toward the cabin, the woods came alive around me, the rustle of branches, the snap of twigs underfoot. I could feel it behind me, the sound of its movements fluid and predatory. Panic surged, and I pushed myself harder, fear propelling me forward. The cabin came into view, a beacon of safety against the darkness. I reached the door and slammed it shut, locking it with shaking hands. I leaned against it, gasping for air, my mind racing. The glowing eyes haunted my thoughts, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. They had gone into the woods, but now I was utterly alone, and whatever had taken them was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity. I had to figure out what happened before it was too late. Story 5, Reflections of the Unseen. I had always been uneasy around mirrors, ever since I was a child. My mother insisted it was just an irrational fear, a trick of the mind fueled by too many horror movies. But I knew, in some deep, primal sense, that there was something more to it. I would stand before the glass, half expecting the reflection to twist and warp into something sinister, something that lurked just beneath the surface. But as I became older, I pushed those thoughts aside, reminding myself that the fears of youth were meant to fade. It was late afternoon when I returned to my childhood home after my father passed away. The house sat at the end of a long gravel road, its weathered facade a stark reminder of all the birthdays celebrated and tears shed within its walls. The air felt heavy with storms, the sky darkening as the sun dipped behind the trees. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from the cold, but from the weight of memories that surrounded me. I stepped inside, the door creaking as it swung open. Dust motes danced in the fading light, and the scent of age would fill my lungs. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet echoed through the silence, a reminder that I was the only one here now. I made my way past familiar rooms, each holding its own story. The kitchen, the living room, each corner felt like a ghost, whispering secrets of the past. It was when I stumbled upon the old family mirror in the hallway that my unease returned full force. It stood tall and imposing, the frame intricately carved with swirling designs that seemed to come alive in the dim light. I had always disliked that mirror. It was a gift from my grandmother, and as a child, I had sworn it was cursed. Even now, I felt a magnetic pull towards it, a combination of dread and curiosity. I forced myself to meet its surface, watching as my reflection stared back at me, pale and hollow-eyed. I tried to focus on my features, to anchor myself in reality, but the mirror began to ripple, like the surface of a disturbed pond. I blinked, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something behind me, a fleeting shadow, perhaps. I turned quickly, but the hallway was empty, as it had been moments before. Shaking my head, I told myself I was being ridiculous. I leaned closer, inspecting the edges of the mirror frame, searching for a crack or a flaw in the glass. Nothing seemed out of place. The mirror was simply an object, a reflection of my own fears, nothing more. But as the evening wore on, that sense of calm began to erode, leaving only a gnawing anxiety in its wake. After settling into my old room, I sat on the bed, the weight of the day finally catching up to me. I tried to shake the feeling of being watched, but I couldn't escape it. I heard the mirror calling to me, its surface a slash of darkness in the room. The room grew colder, and I could have sworn I heard whispers, soft and unintelligible, curling around me like smoke. I could no longer resist. I stood and walked back to the mirror, drawn as if by an invisible thread. My heart raced in my chest as I reached out, fingers trembling before touching the cool glass. It felt alive, thrumming with energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I looked deeper, searching for clarity, for the truth buried beneath the surface. Suddenly, I saw it, the flicker of movement. Behind my reflection, a figure stood, obscured by shadows. I jerked back, gasping. My heart hammered in my chest, and my pulse quickened. But when I leaned closer, the figure was gone, replaced by nothing more than my own terrified reflection staring back, wide-eyed and gasping for breath. I backed away from the mirror, fear making my throat tight. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears, drowning out the whispers that seemed to echo from within the woodwork of the house. The room felt constricting, the walls pressing in. I stumbled backward, eyes locked on the mirror, half expecting the figure to reappear at any moment. It was then that I noticed something I had missed before, a crack running diagonally across the glass, thin yet deep, as though it held some dark secret within. I could feel the pull again, an invitation to explore what lay beyond the surface. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. I had to leave, had to get out of this room. But I was rooted to the spot, torn between the need to escape and an irrational curiosity that gnawed at my sanity. As night fell, the shadows in the room lengthened, the mirror dominating my view like a mouth waiting to consume me. I sensed that whatever had lurked behind the glass had not disappeared. It was merely biding its time. And the longer I stared, the more I felt reality slipping away, the line between the living and the trapped blurring. I don't remember what happened next, only a sense of impending danger. I turned to leave, but something stopped me. I could not shake the feeling that if I were to abandon the mirror now, it would somehow come for me, dragging me into the depths of its dark world. The air thickened, tense with the knowledge that something unholy awaited just beyond the reflection. As I stood there, trying to convince myself to run, I felt a chill creep up my spine, and the hairs on my neck stood on end. Something in the mirror shifted, something that was not my reflection, but something else entirely. And the whispers grew louder, echoing through my mind, chilling me to the bone. The air in my bedroom felt thick and suffocating, as if the shadows had manifested into something tangible. I could hardly breathe as I stared at the mirror across the room, the one I had avoided since that night. Just a week ago, it had been a simple reflection of my room, a benign surface that offered nothing but an image of my tired face. Now it was a door to something far more sinister. After that unsettling encounter, I had barricaded my mind against the mirror's whispers, but at night, sleep eluded me. I had tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light, that the fleeting shadow I had seen was merely my imagination playing tricks on me. Yet, each time I glanced at the mirror, it felt like something was watching, lurking just out of sight, eager to break through the glass. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow that made my room feel almost normal. I took a deep breath and stood, ready to confront my fears. I would not allow whatever malevolence had stirred to dictate my life. I would face it. As I approached the mirror, every step sent jolts of dread racing through my body. I felt intensely aware of every creak of the floorboards beneath my weight, each sound amplified in the thick silence. The mirror loomed larger than ever, its surface gleaming invitingly yet ominously at the same time. I reached out, my fingertips brushing against the cool frame. It felt heavy, as though it were pressing down on me, urging me to retreat, but I clenched my jaw and pressed on. I stared into my own eyes, searching for something familiar, something comforting amidst the growing terror. My reflection was warped, the edges of my image rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. "You're just tired," I muttered to myself, breaking the silence. My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the oppressive air. I stepped closer, my heart racing, half expecting to see something shift behind me in the reflection. Instead, there was only me, my disheveled hair and weary gaze. But then, just at the edge of my vision, I caught a flicker. A shadow darted behind me, something that didn't belong. I spun around, but my room was empty. I turned back to the mirror, my breath hitching in my throat. The shadow lingered in the glass, dark and shifting, a palpable entity that seemed to smile back at me. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the bed. My reflection grinned, a sick parody of my own horrified expression, and I whipped my head to the side again, heart hammering like an echoing drum. There was nothing. Just my disarrayed room and the grainy light spilling through the window. I waited, heart racing, listening to the familiar creaks of the old house. The silence was deafening. I glanced back at the mirror. My reflection appeared unchanged, yet the air felt charged, as though an unseen force was coiling tighter around me. I could feel its weight pressing down on my chest, urging me to dwell on what I had seen. I turned away, shaking my head like a child attempting to banish nightmares. I needed to keep my mind clear, to focus on anything that would ground me in reality. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table and scrolled through messages, hoping the mundane nature of the text would anchor me. But even that felt hollow. The shadows danced at the edges of my sight, whispering familiar phrases I had dared not to acknowledge. After hours of pacing and battling my growing dread, I finally succumbed to exhaustion and collapsed into bed. I lay with my back to the mirror, deliberately avoiding its lure, praying that sleep would take me far away from these waking horrors. But sleep evaded me, the echoes of muffled whispers taunting me from the other side of the glass. In the dead of night, the oppressive silence shattered. I jolted awake, heart racing as I strained to listen. The whispers had morphed into incoherent murmurs, swirling like a thick fog. My skin prickled, and instinctively, I turned to the mirror, the unavoidable pull stronger than my resolve. As I faced my reflection, I gasped. There was a figure standing behind me, its features obscured by darkness. I stumbled out of bed, scrambling to put distance between us. The figure remained rooted to the spot, an indistinct blur in the glass, a grotesque mimicry of a human. I wanted to scream, to flee, but I was frozen, trapped in the moment. The figure raised a hand, fingers elongated and twisted, as if beckoning me closer. My breath quickened as I fought against the impulse to approach. I knew better. I recognized that this was no mere shadow. This was something beyond my understanding. The whispers intensified, drowning out my thoughts with their insistent chant. Come closer. Join us. The words were hollow, resonating with a chilling familiarity. I felt the air grow cold, a shiver running down my spine. In a moment of clarity, I caught a glimpse of my true reflection, distorted yet undeniable, revealing fear and defiance. I remembered the stories of those who had been consumed by their reflections, who had vanished without a trace, drawn in by the allure of what lay beyond the glass. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned away, breaking the spell. I ran from the room, my pulse pounding in my ears as I fled the grasp of the mirror. Yet, even as I fled, a lingering sense of dread remained. I could feel it watching, waiting for the moment I would falter, the moment I would return. I pressed my back against the wall of the hallway, breathless and trembling, determined not to let the darkness creep back into my life. But I knew, deep down, that the mirror would not let me go easily. It had awakened something inside me, and I could feel it in the cold tendrils wrapping around my heart, a promise that this was far from over. The following morning, I awoke in a haze, every nerve ending tingling with a sensation I had never known before. My dreams had been punctuated by visions of that mirror, its surface swirling with darkness, and I recalled the phantom fingers that had grazed my skin, so cold and demanding. Though the daylight bathed my room in a warm glow, I could still feel the chill of the night clinging to me like fog, thick and suffocating. I tried to shake off the remnants of my unease, telling myself that it had been just a dream, an echo of the strange events from the previous day. As I dressed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror, my reflection unnervingly clear, but the shadows behind it seemed to twist and shimmer, as if something lurked just outside my line of sight. I turned away quickly, shoving the sensation deep down, but it had rooted itself in my mind like a weed before I could pull it out. Breakfast was a blur of coffee and toast, my thoughts entangled with the unsettling memory of the mirror in the attic. Despite my apprehension, I felt an inexplicable pull toward it. I had to know more, to confront whatever dark allure it possessed, the bewitching grasp it had on my psyche. I was alone in the house, my parents away for the weekend, leaving me with a restless silence that only amplified the shadows creeping in from the corners of my mind. After shoving my uneaten toast into the garbage, I made my way to the attic, the steps creaking beneath me in a slow, reluctant protest. The door creaked open, and dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through a dirty window, but the real focus of my attention was the mirror, its surface glinting ominously. I approached it with hesitant steps, my heart racing as I reached out a hand to touch the glass. It was cool against my fingers, and as I pressed my palm flat against it, I felt a ripple, like a stone thrown into a lake. My breath caught in my throat as the ripple expanded, distorting my reflection into something otherworldly. My face twisted and morphed, every feature warped and exaggerated, a grotesque caricature that sent a chill racing down my spine. For a moment, I thought I saw another face behind mine, a face with sunken eyes and a malevolent grin. I stumbled back, shaking my head to dispel the vision, but it lingered on the edges of my mind, taunting me with its vivid detail. "Get a grip," I whispered to myself, frustration mingling with fear. "It's just a reflection." I stepped closer again, drawn as if by invisible strings, and leaned in to peer deeper into the glossy surface. It was then that I noticed something moving, a flicker of motion that didn't belong to me. My reflection smiled back, even as my own lips remained firmly shut. A thrill of terror coursed through me, and I recoiled, nearly losing my balance. What was happening? The mirror wasn't just reflecting me, it was alive. I took a step back, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, an illusion conjured by my sleep-deprived mind. I had to prove to myself that I could control what I saw. So, I leaned in once more, focusing on my own eyes, willing my reflection to reflect my true emotions. To my horror, it didn't just mimic, it seemed to revel in my fear. I turned away, heart pounding, and hurried down the attic steps, but the echo of my reflection's malevolence clung to me. I needed to escape, to break free from the grasp of the mirror's thrall. But I could still feel its pull, like a siren calling me back. The day dragged on, filled with mundane tasks that suddenly seemed trivial in the face of my discovery. Yet, I couldn't shake the haunting thought of that mirror. I tried to occupy myself with homework and music, but found my mind drifting back to the attic. The more I fought against it, the stronger the compulsion grew. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the windows, I finally succumbed to the magnetic force of the attic. Each step felt heavier than the last, dread and curiosity twined tightly in my chest. I reached for the door, hesitating for a moment before pushing it open. The attic seemed darker now, the air heavy with an unsettling anticipation. I crept toward the mirror, its surface gleaming malevolently in the low light. My reflection stared back, unnervingly awaiting my arrival. I took a deep breath and leaned in for a closer look, heart racing. The moment my eyes locked onto my reflection, an electric jolt surged through me. It wasn't merely an echo of my image, it was a doorway. A boundary to something else, something dark and insatiable. It began to distort again, the features twisting grotesquely, but this time I felt no fear. Instead, a sense of belonging washed over me. A voice, soft and alluring, whispered through the veil of the glass. "Join us." My heart raced as I felt the mirror's sinister promise tug at the edges of my mind. I reached out, fingers brushing the glass, and the world around me faded, its colors bleeding into darkness, the air growing thicker until I could hardly breathe. The whisper grew louder, pulling me in, and as I stepped closer, I realized too late that the line between my world and the one beyond had begun to blur. The mirror rippled, and in that moment, I saw what waited on the other side. Not just my reflection, but something waiting for me. The last shred of my resolve crumbled as the darkness enveloped me, every heartbeat sinking with the pulse of the cold glass. I felt my body responding, willing, almost yearning to cross over. But then I hesitated, and in that fleeting moment of clarity, a thought clawed its way back. This was a trap. But was I too late? As I stood there, caught in the fragile web of reality, I understood that this mirror was no mere object. It was a predator, and I was its prey. The morning sunlight filtered through my bedroom window, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the floor. Despite the warm light, a chill licked at my spine, a remnant of the previous night's events. I could hardly believe I had fallen asleep at all. The reflection I had seen in the bathroom mirror haunted me, a twisted version of myself that lingered at the edges of my memory. I had closed my eyes, desperate to erase the image, yet it clung to me like a shadow. I rose slowly, each movement deliberate, as if I could will away the fear that gripped me. The mirror in the hallway beckoned me, its surface gleaming, and I shivered as I walked past. I had become hyper-aware of its presence, an unwelcome companion in my home. I could almost hear my breath against the glass, the sound amplifying the silence around me. After breakfast, I decided to return to the bathroom. I flipped the light switch and watched as the bulbs flickered to life, illuminating the familiar space. The mirror stood opposite the sink, an innocent fixture in a room that had transformed into a chamber of dread. I approached it, almost hesitantly, my heart pounding with each step. I needed to confront a reflection, to make sense of what I had seen. As I stood before the glass, I felt an insistent pull, as if the mirror were an entity unto itself, drawing me in. My fingers trembled as they hovered just above the surface. I dared to look, forcing myself to maintain eye contact with my own reflection. But it wasn't just me staring back, it was that thing, the reflection, that had grinned and twisted itself into something grotesque. The edges of my reflection rippled, the glass warping as if it were breathing. I blinked, and my heart raced, the corners of my mouth twitched upwards, mimicking the smile I had seen before. I recoiled, stumbling back and slamming my hands against the sink to steady myself. Panic surged through me, a raw and primal instinct to flee. I turned away, swallowing hard. I needed to escape that accursed reflection, but as I moved to leave, I caught a glimpse of something. A shadow flickered at the edge of the mirror, just out of view. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. I knew I should run, but curiosity held me captive. Was it merely a trick of the light? Or something lurking beyond the fragile barrier of glass? I leaned in closer, peering into the depths of the mirror as if it might reveal its secrets. With every inch I drew nearer, the air thickened, pressing against my lungs. I felt a presence, a weight in the atmosphere that had not been there before. The shadows coalesced, and I could swear I saw the outline of a figure forming behind my reflection. "Stop it," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You're just imagining things." But as the words left my lips, the figure in the glass shifted, taking shape. A face emerged, not my own, but an uncanny replica that wore an expression of malicious glee. Its eyes sparkled with a dark delight, and I recoiled, fear coursing through my veins. It was trapped, yet it felt so alive, so powerful, feeding off my horror. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. How long had I been standing there? I needed to think, to find a way to break this cycle. My mind raced back to the stories I'd heard, tales of mirrors acting as portals, reflections revealing hidden truths. But what truth awaited me here? I turned to leave, but the mirror's surface rippled again, and a whisper tickled my ear. "Stay with me." The voice was a seductive purr, laced with darkness that wrapped around my mind like a serpent. "No," I gasped, shaking my head as if that could dispel the horror. I stumbled backward, grasping for the door, desperate to escape. But something clawed at my feet, a weight dragging me down, and I fell against the cold tiles. The reflection watched, its smile widening with delight. It was no longer just a mirror, but a sentient being, reveling in my suffering. I could see it reaching for me, its hands stretching out from the glass, fingers curling into the air as if they could pull me into its world. The realization hit me like a blow. It wanted me to come closer, to join it in that disturbing realm where reality twisted into nightmares. I pushed myself to my feet, heart racing, and I bolted from the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. I needed help, somewhere safe, somewhere free from the malevolent grasp of the mirror. My thoughts darted to Claire, my best friend. She had always had a knack for absolving fears with her level-headed reasoning. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed her number. The phone rang, each tone echoing in the oppressive silence of my apartment. I needed her to answer. I needed to escape this madness. But as the call connected, I heard her voice, a calm and soothing sound, yet it felt distant, as if coming from another world. "Hello?" she answered, and the warmth of her voice was a welcome balm. "Claire, you have to come over. Please. Something is wrong, so wrong." My words rushed out, desperate and frantic. Okay. I'll be there soon," she said, her voice steady, but doubt gnawed at me. Would she understand? Would she see the horror I had witnessed? After hanging up, I paced the living room, the shadows creeping into the corners, waiting like specters. Time stretched, each minute a torturous eternity. I glanced at the hallway mirror, apprehension squeezing my chest. With Claire on the way, I forced myself to keep my back turned toward the glass. Yet, I could feel its silent gaze, its insidious whisper clawing at my sanity. I wanted to scream, but instead, I focused on the ticking clock, counting down the moments until I wouldn't be alone anymore. But as the shadows deepened and uncertainty loomed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror would not let go so easily. The morning sun spilled through the curtains, casting fractured patterns on the floor, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in the pit of my stomach. As I sat at the kitchen table, the remnants of my uneaten breakfast lay cold and untouched, the smell of eggs and toast mingling with the stale air that hung around me. I struggled to shake off the residue of last night's terror. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that my reflection, smiling back at me with a malice that chilled my blood. I had spent the previous day researching the house's history, diving into local archives and musty books. Tales of madness and despair clung to the walls of this place like the dust I couldn't seem to brush away. But I couldn't find anything concrete about mirrors, nothing that could explain my torment. Each article I read felt like a warning, urging me to flee, yet my feet remained rooted. That morning, I finally summoned the courage to approach the mirror in my bedroom. It still stood there, framed in ornate carvings that seemed to twist and writhe in the light. I had avoided it all day, afraid of the truth it might reveal. I understood that this terror was born of me, a reflection of my own fears and guilt. But I had to confront it. I needed to understand why the image within it had spoken to me in that sinister way. I walked gingerly toward the mirror, the floor creaking beneath my hesitant steps. As I caught my reflection, I was struck by the clarity of my features, yet there was an unsettling quality that made my heart pound. It was not just my face staring back, it was something more, something lurking just beyond the veil of the glass. The memory of last night flooded back, the whispering voice, the feeling of the mirror pulling at me, as if it sought to draw me into its depths. I raised a trembling hand to touch the surface, my fingers hovering a breath away. I wanted to know if it would feel cold, like the dread that clung to my skin. But just as I was about to contact the surface, I noticed something move behind my reflection, a shadow flitted from the corner of my eye. I jerked back, heart racing, but the room behind me was empty. The shadows danced innocently, just a play of light. Yet when I glanced back at the mirror, I caught sight of a flicker of movement, a figure in the depths that wasn't my own. My breath caught in my throat. It had no distinct features, just a vague silhouette that beckoned to me with an ache of familiarity. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely rising above the silence that enveloped the house. The reflection smiled again, its lips curling in a way that felt almost affectionate but was far from it a grotesque parody of joy. It spoke without words, and somehow, I understood its intent. I was being summoned, drawn to whatever lay beyond the mirror's glassy surface, and a part of me felt compelled to answer. I shook my head, trying to expel the madness that threatened to consume me. I turned and fled the room, retreating into the noise of my own thoughts. The kitchen now felt eerily quiet, every creak of the floor sounding like a warning. I busied myself, washing dishes and filling the air with mundane tasks, thinking I could push away the dread. But when dusk began to creep in, the shadows began to lengthen, and I felt the pull of the mirror once more. The sun sank lower, leaving the room awash in cold blue light. It called to me like a siren, luring me back to its depths. I resisted for as long as I could, but that nagging sense of inevitability grew stronger. As night fell, I knew I would have to face it again. I steeled myself, pulling my shoulders back as I walked into the bedroom. The mirror loomed large, its surface reflecting a distorted version of my anxious form. I felt my heart thudding in my chest, drowning out the silence. I approached slowly, the creeping dread wrapping around me like a vice. The moment I was close enough to peer into the depths of the glass, the figure within sprang back to life, twisting and contorting as though it were trapped, desperate to break free. My breath hitched, and I felt the air grow thick with tension. Suddenly, it stopped moving, its stillness unnerving. I stared into its eyes, or rather, the space where its eyes should have been. And then it leaned forward, pressing against the glass as if trying to break through. The surface rippled like water, and that voice, soft yet menacing, whispered once more, "Join me." A chill swept through me as waves of nausea washed over my senses. I staggered back, my heart racing to a frenetic pace. "I am not like you," I shouted, the words echoing in the stillness. The reflection regarded me with a twisted grin, and in that moment, I was struck by a revelation. It wasn't merely a reflection, it was a part of me, a dark echo that had been suppressed. I felt anger rise within me, a fire igniting in my gut. "You don't own me," I yelled, stepping forward again, confronting the mirror with renewed defiance. The figure recoiled momentarily, its smile faltering. "You will not take me." But my words were met with a resonant laughter, a cacophony of sound that rippled through the air, shaking the very foundation of my resolve. Just as I thought I could break free from its grasp, the glass began to shimmer, and a crack splintered across its surface. Panic surged within me, but I refused to back down. And then, with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed, I lunged forward, hands striking the mirror as I felt the cold glass give way beneath my palms. I was ready to break the cycle of horror, ready to resist my own reflection and the darkness that threatened to consume me. But as I pressed against it, the glass felt warmer, and for a fleeting moment, I couldn't tell which side of the mirror I truly belonged to. Story 6, Echoes in the Abandoned Wilderness. The wind howled through the trees that bordered the forest, a constant reminder of the storm brewing in the distance. I leaned against the dashboard of the command van, staring out at the darkening sky. The radio crackled with the voices of the volunteers, all of us caught in a shared sense of desperation. Days had passed since Sarah went missing, and our search had turned from hopeful to distressing. She had been hiking alone, or so we thought. The reports had trickled in hiking trails, a last known location marked by a photo of her in the woods, a sun-drenched smile that seemed worlds away now. I felt the weight of my own guilt pressing down as I recalled the last conversation I had with her. She had seemed so carefree, dreams of escaping into the wilderness for a weekend of solitude, something I had tried to discourage. My instincts had screamed against it, but I hadn't wanted to sound controlling. The door opened, and Jim, our team leader, stepped inside, shaking rain from his gear. He looked older than his years, his face drawn tight with worry. "We're heading back to the ridge before the storm hits," he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. We picked up a signal on the tracker she was wearing. My heart raced at the news. The tracker had been our beacon of hope amidst the growing despair. "Where?" I asked, my hands instinctively clenching into fists. "About 2 miles in, near the old logging road. But it's glitchy, fluctuating. We'll have to move quickly." I nodded, fighting the instinct to hesitate. The woods were unforgiving, and the last thing we needed was to be caught in a storm while chasing a fading signal. Rain began to patter on the van roof, a quiet drumroll that signified a gathering storm of its own. The others gathered their packs and gear, readying themselves for the trek ahead. I joined them, my heart a mix of hope and dread. As we stepped into the woods, the trees loomed tall and dark, the foliage whispering secrets I couldn't decipher. The path was slick with rain but felt familiar underfoot, memories of childhood hikes flooding back. Yet this was different. This was not a day of adventure. This was a race against time. We trudged along, our flashlights cutting through the thickening gloom. Each beam of light illuminated the underbrush, revealing nothing but shadows that held our breath. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches creaking like old bones, as if the trees were watching and waiting, but I dismissed the thought. It was just my imagination running wild. After an hour of heavy silence, Jim stopped and turned, pointing to a narrow trail that veered off from the main path. "This is where the signal is strongest," he said, his voice low. I felt a chill run down my spine, dread pooling in my stomach. We followed him cautiously, the trail twisting deeper into the woods. The rain picked up, drumming louder against the leaves. I glanced back often, conscious of how easily one could get lost in these labyrinthine paths. The air changed, it thickened, charged with something I couldn't name. Fear, perhaps. Suddenly, we heard it, a voice carried by the wind, faint yet eerie. It was calling, a desperate sound that sent shivers racing across my skin. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. Jim nodded, his expression grim. He raised his flashlight, the beam wavering as he searched for the source. "Sarah," he called out, his voice echoing through the trees. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind that deepens the shadows. Then the voice came again, sharper this time, insistent. "Help. I'm here. Please." My heart raced as I recognized the frantic tone. It was unmistakably Sarah's. We exchanged glances, a mix of hope and apprehension electrifying the air. "This way," I shouted, pushing forward against the instinct to retreat. We stumbled through the underbrush, branches clawing our jackets as we hurried toward the sound. The forest grew denser, shadows coiling around us. The rain turned to a steady downpour, soaking us in moments. "Just ahead," I shouted, desperation tightening my throat. But as we broke through the last line of trees, the clearing opened up before us like a grave, silent and vast. In the center was an old hunting shack, its roof sagging, walls covered in moss. It felt wrong, like a pause in time, a place forgotten. "Sarah," Jim hollered, urgency in his voice. "Here." "I'm here," came the voice again, but it was muffled now, indistinct. As we approached the shack, my instinct screamed at me to stop. This was not where the signal had led us. It felt like a trap. I slowed, feeling my pulse quicken as the rain dripped cold against my skin. Jim reached the door first, pushing it open with a creak that echoed like a warning. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with decay. A single beam of light from Jim's flashlight illuminated the dust motes swirling in the gloom. "Sarah," he called again, but the silence that answered was oppressive. "Over here." The voice was alarmingly close, now rising and falling through the darkness. It had shifted from panic to something softer, almost coaxing. "Help me, please." Somewhere deep inside me, a voice warned of the danger. I hesitated, taking a step back, but the others pressed on, drawn into the shack's dark embrace. I could feel the atmosphere change, a pulse of something unseen creeping up my spine. The sound of rain faded away, swallowed by a heavy stillness. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the far corner, just past the beam of the flashlight, a shadow that felt alive. "Let's go!" I shouted, panic rising like bile in my throat, but it was too late. Jim and the others were already stepping inside, the door swinging shut behind them with a thud that echoed like thunder. The last thing I saw was the glow of the flashlight illuminating a figure in the corner, a face twisted in an expression I couldn't understand. And then the whispering returned, curling around me like fingers, dark and unrelenting. The air felt heavier the next day, pregnant with unease as I stood at the edge of the woods, where the trees loomed like silent sentinels. The sun broke through a smattering of clouds, illuminating the path ahead but casting elongated shadows that twisted and warped into grotesque shapes. Every time I glanced toward the forest, I half expected to see Sarah step out from the underbrush, her eyes wide with relief and confusion, like a lost child returning home. But this was no children's tale. My phone buzzed in my pocket, tearing me from my spiraling thoughts. It was a message from Tom, the lead ranger. He wanted me to meet him at the station for an update. The urgency in his tone was intoxicating, a cocktail of hope and dread that churned in my stomach as I trudged back to my vehicle. The station was a hive of activity when I arrived. Maps were spread across tables, multiple radios squawked with fragmented communication, and rangers milled about, their faces drawn and weary. It felt like an operation out of a war film rather than a search for my sister. "Glad you made it," Tom said when he spotted me. The lines around his eyes were pronounced, darkening his expression with an unsettling gravity. "We've got more reports coming in." "You mean more sightings?" I asked, my heart racing as I clung to a thread of optimism. He shook his head, running a hand through his thinning hair. "No, more disappearances. 3 more people went missing last night, just like Sarah. It's unsettling." The word unsettling felt too weak to describe what was brewing in the woods. I could feel it crawling beneath my skin, pulsing with every second that ticked by. How can that happen? How can people just vanish? Tom sighed, his gaze drifting toward the open map. Dotted lines marked out our search zones. We've combed through the main trails and several offshoots, but these new cases are in areas we haven't reached yet. It's almost like something is luring them. "Luring them," I repeated, the words echoing in my mind like a sinister whisper. My instinct screamed that there was more to this than a simple case of lost hikers. Tom pulled out a folder, flipping it open. "We're mobilizing a larger team. We need all hands on deck. You can join us if you're up for it." There was no question in my mind. I nodded, determination coursing through me. I'm not leaving without Sarah. As we prepared to head back to the woods, I noticed a few rangers exchanging glances. Their whispers were clipped, laden with a sense of urgency that set my nerves on edge. The air was thick with anxiety, and I could feel that my presence was both welcomed and feared. Our team set off in a convoy of vehicles, the distant sounds of the forest surrounding us. Each crunch of gravel beneath tires felt like a countdown, the seconds ticking away as we moved deeper into the shadows of the trees. I sat in the front seat with Tom, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. "What do you think is happening out there?" I asked, glancing sideways at him. He frowned, eyes focused on the road. "It's hard to say. We've had cases of hikers becoming disoriented, but something is different this time." I nodded but felt a chill creep over me at his words. As we parked at the edge of the search zone, the forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. Each step I took toward the tree-line consumed me with dread, and yet an unexplainable pull urged me forward. We divided into teams, and I paired with a young ranger named Jess. She was fresh out of training, and her energy was a stark contrast to the unease wrapped around me like a shroud. We moved cautiously, the sounds of the forest amplifying. Leaves rustled ominously, and distant animal calls echoed like a warning. "Keep your eyes peeled," Jess reminded me, her voice steady as we navigated deeper. "If we hear anything out of the ordinary, we should regroup." I nodded, though my heart pounded in my chest. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth felt amplified, shifting my focus from the serene beauty of nature to the primal fear it could inspire. Branches clawed at my sleeves, the forest itself seeming to rebel against our intrusion. Hours faded, and the sun began its descent, casting dull orange hues through the canopy. I could feel fatigue settling into my bones, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. Jess suggested we take a short break, and we settled on a fallen log, sipping water and scanning the surrounding area. "You really think we'll find her?" Jess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, searching for reassurance in my own heart. "I have to believe we will," I finally said, though doubt gnawed me like a ravenous animal. The forest was quiet, too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Then, a sound pierced the silence, a distant scream. It echoed through the trees, a raw, piercing wail that froze my blood. It was a sound full of despair, and it came from deeper within the woods. Jess and I exchanged a look, the gravity of that chilling cry settling around us like a heavy fog. "What was that?" she whispered, eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but we need to check it out," I said, my heart racing. Before I could rethink it, I surged to my feet, and we moved toward the sound, adrenaline masking our apprehension. The forest swallowed us once more, branches snapping underfoot as we pressed on, guided by that haunting cry. It grew louder, more frantic. I felt it trembling in my legs, a warning that this was not the path I should tread, but I was beyond listening to reason. Each shriek cut deeper, drawing me closer to the heart of the horror before us. We stumbled into a clearing, and the world seemed to spin as I took in what lay ahead. A figure was struggling against the ground, flailing against something unseen. It was a young man, his face twisted in fear and desperation. My heart sank. The air shifted as if the forest itself were holding its breath, and suddenly, everything felt wrong. I grabbed Jess's arm, pulling her back as instinct screamed for us to retreat. The young man's eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I understood the true depth of our danger. Whatever had him ensnared was coming for us next. The sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks, casting an orange haze over the forest as we trudged on. Each step felt heavier than the last, the oppressive weight of the looming trees and the unyielding silence wrapping around me like a thick fog. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a reminder of the days that had slipped away since we had begun our search for Aaron. We had split into teams, a necessary precaution. I was with Tom and Mia, two of the more experienced members of the search party. Tom was a stoic man, his face weathered and drawn from years spent in the field. Mia was the opposite, her youthful energy infused with a sense of urgency that drove us forward. I tried to match their pace, but the growing unease in my stomach only slowed me down. It had been 3 days since Aaron had disappeared, and the more time that passed, the more frantic I became. Just a few hours prior, Tom had suggested we check the old logging roads. People get lost up here all the time. They think they know the trails, but they don't. We might find something. As dusk settled in, our flashlights flickered to life, beams of artificial light cutting through the darkening woods. I felt a chill skitter down my spine, not from the cold, but from a gnawing fear. What if we found Aaron? What if we didn't? "Let's head down this way," Tom said, motioning toward a narrow path that wound deeper into the trees. "The logs are old, but it looks like someone might have passed through recently." Mia nodded, her determination unwavering. "Stay close," she said, her voice firm. We moved forward, the sound of leaves crunching beneath our boots filling the air. I focused on the rhythmic thud of my heart, its steady beat a poor substitute for the comfort my mind craved. As we ventured deeper, the atmosphere shifted. The trees felt closer, their gnarled branches stretching overhead like skeletal fingers. Shadows darted just beyond the reach of our lights, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Did you hear that?" Mia suddenly whispered, halting in her tracks. Tom and I exchanged glances, the tension spiking between us. "Hear what?" I asked, straining to listen. A distant rustle echoed from beyond the trees, a sound so faint it could have been the wind, yet something in my gut warned me otherwise. "Let's keep moving," Tom urged, though his voice held an edge of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. We pressed on, curiosity mingling with dread as the path began to narrow. The trees loomed, their trunks thick and imposing, blotting out all but the faint glimmers of twilight. When we reached a clearing, we paused, taking stock of our surroundings. The clearing was eerily quiet. I scanned the area, my flashlight beam dancing across the ground. That's when I noticed something, a piece of clothing snagged on a thorny bush. I stepped closer, my heart racing. It was a tattered red shirt, unmistakably Aaron's. "Guys, over here," I called, and Tom and Mia rushed to my side. "What the hell?" Tom murmured, kneeling to examine the fabric. "This is hers." My stomach twisted at the implications. What does this mean? She was here. But where is she now? Mia looked around, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to keep looking. We have to find her." I nodded, the urgency fueling me. But as we turned to leave the clearing, a loud crack echoed through the woods, followed by an unnatural silence. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, scanning our surroundings. "What was that?" Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. "Probably just a fallen branch," I suggested, though my heart raced. "It came from that direction," Mia pointed toward the darkened trees. "Let's go check it out." As we ventured toward the sound, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The woods felt alive, teasing us with their secrets, and I could almost hear the whispers hidden among the branches. The shadows thickened, swallowing our light and stretching into an inky abyss. When we reached the source of the noise, the sight made my blood run cold. A massive, decaying tree lay sprawled on the ground, its roots torn from the earth. Beneath the twisted roots, something glimmered faintly in the darkness. "Is that?" Tom stepped closer, his flashlight illuminating a glint of metal. A backpack. It was Aaron's. My heart sank as fear clawed at my throat. I grabbed Tom's arm, panic rising in my chest. "We need to get out of here. This isn't right." But before I could move, a chilling wind rushed through the clearing, carrying with it a low, guttural sound. "Did you hear that?" Mia screamed, and I felt my heart hammering in my chest. Before I could respond, a shape emerged from the shadows, hulking and grotesque, its features obscured by the dim light. It stood at the edge of the clearing, watching us with a predator's gaze. "Run!" Tom shouted, and we took off, our breath ragged in the suffocating darkness. Branches whipped at my skin as we barreled through the woods, fear propelling us forward. I glanced back, and the creature was there, lumbering after us with an unnatural speed, its low growl echoing through the trees. We stumbled into the confines of a dense thicket, our flashlights flickering as the weight of the darkness threatened to consume us. The world closed in around me, and I could no longer distinguish the shadows from whatever hunted us. "Keep moving," Mia urged, but her voice was strained with terror. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, that whatever stalked us had a purpose. Desperation surged as I forced my legs to carry me forward, the echoes of our own panic reverberating in my ears. The woods had become a labyrinth of fear, and as we fled, I couldn't help but wonder if we were about to find Aaron or if the forest had claimed yet another victim. The forest loomed above me, a tangle of shadows and whispers. I had barely caught my breath after the last harrowing hours of searching. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky shifted from a warm orange to a bruised blue, the twilight creeping in like something alive. With each passing moment, my sense of unease deepened, and I was painfully aware that the search was no longer about finding Lily. It had become a race against the dark, a battle against something I could not quite name. I stumbled through the underbrush, my flashlight flickering like a heartbeat. I'd lost track of how long I had been wandering. The only constant was the gnawing fear that had settled into my bones since the moment Lily had vanished. The forest didn't just swallow sounds, it seemed to absorb hope, leaving behind a thick, oppressive silence that made every rustle, every snap of a twig, feel like a harbinger of doom. It was late afternoon when I had joined the search party. We were a group of local volunteers, each of us armed with flashlights, radios, and grim resolve. But as daylight faded, my comrades drifted apart, each of us swallowed by our own dread. The others had dispersed, their voices swallowed by the fastness of the trees, leaving me to navigate the suffocating gloom alone. I recalled the frantic calls we had made earlier. "Lily," we shouted, our voices echoing back to us, unanswered. As shadows advanced, I felt the weight of those calls settling heavily in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was drawing closer to something sinister. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I had to know. I had to find her. In the distance, through the thick curtain of trees, I thought I saw a flicker of light, a beacon calling out to me. I quickened my pace, pushing through the brambles that snagged at my clothes and skin. As I drew nearer, the light grew stronger, more defined, a glow that danced with an unsettling rhythm. I hesitated, heart racing, every part of me screaming to retreat. But it was too late. I was too close. The clearing opened before me, revealing an old hunting cabin I had never seen before, its structure leaning precariously as if it were about to collapse. The light flickered in the window, casting eerie shadows that twisted against the walls. I stepped cautiously forward, the wooden planks creaking beneath my weight. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with dust and decay, the air stale, as though it had been sealed for decades. "Lily?" I called, my voice trembling as it echoed around the room. No answer came. The light seemed to pulse, drawing me further inside. I entered the main room, discovering a small table with scattered papers, remnants of a life long abandoned. I rifled through them, my heart pounding louder than ever, accounts of failed hunts, the tone increasingly paranoid, tales of things lost in the dark, never to return. I felt a chill creep along my spine. Then, a faint whisper stopped me cold. I turned slowly, heart racing, only to find the source of the light, a lantern, inexplicably lit and swaying gently despite the absence of any visible breeze. My breath quickened, and I could taste the metallic tang of fear. Alone in this forgotten place, I felt the walls closing in around me. "Lily?" I pleaded again, desperation leaking into my voice. The cabin answered only with silence, an oppressive silence that clawed at my insides. I took a step back, ready to flee, when a movement caught my eye, a shadow flitting past the window. I rushed to the light, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, hoping for a glimpse of someone, anyone. What I saw stopped my heart. A figure stood at the edge of the tree line, half obscured by the gathering darkness. The figure was too still, too quiet. I squinted, straining to see through the dimness. Was it a trick of the light? A figment of my mind unraveling under the weight of fear? I blinked, and it was gone. Panic surged through me. "Lily!" I screamed, the desperate cry tearing from my throat. I turned, bolting for the door, but something caught my eye, a scuff mark on the floor. My heart thudded loudly as I crouched down, brushing aside the dust. There was something etched into the wood. Worn but legible, it read, "Get out." My blood ran cold, and a chill slithered down my spine. I shot upright, ready to leave this cursed place, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Trapped. My pulse raced as I pounded against the door, but it wouldn't yield. Behind me, the lantern flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the walls. A low growl rumbled from the corner of the room, and I turned slowly to face whatever horrors lay within. In the dim light, I saw them, eyes, dozens of them glittering in the darkness, fixated on me, each one reflecting a primal hunger. They were not human. They were not animal. They were a nightmare, drawn to me, drawn to my fear. I backed away, desperately searching for another way out, but the walls seemed to close in, trapping me with my own terror. The eyes continued to glow, and I felt the darkness encroaching, suffocating. In that moment, I realized that the forest had not just taken Lily. It had taken something else, a part of me, a part of anyone foolish enough to wander too far. I screamed again, a raw sound of desperation that echoed in the cabin, but the only response was the relentless growl, a sinister promise that the true nightmare was just beginning. The air in the forest felt heavier than it had the day before. I stood at the edge of the clearing where we had pitched our tents, scanning the thick trees for any sign of movement. The early morning sun struggled to penetrate the canopy above, casting elongated shadows that twisted and danced along the ground, adding to the unease bubbling in my stomach. I had volunteered for the search and rescue team not just for the thrill of it, but because I felt a deep sense of obligation to those who ventured into the wilderness, sometimes never to return. The missing hiker, a young woman named Lila, had been gone for nearly a week, and with each passing hour, hope dwindled like the waning daylight. As I tightened the laces of my sturdy boots, I heard the low murmur of voices behind me. I turned to see my fellow team members huddled together, their expressions grave. Mark, the team leader, gestured for silence as he reviewed our plan for the day. "We're splitting into groups," he said, his voice steady but clipped. "A few of us will head north along the riverbank. The rest will take the trail toward Owl's Peak, where the terrain has been known to shift. It's been too quiet for too long." I felt a chill slide down my spine, a premonition that something was terribly wrong. As I gathered my gear, I stole glances at the other team members. They all looked just as anxious as I felt, each preoccupied with their own thoughts, each wrestling with the fear of what we might find. We set off soon after, stepping into the underbrush that whispered around us. The trail wound deeper into the forest, with trees rising like ancient sentinels. I trudged forward, trying to focus on the task at hand despite the shadows that seemed to follow me. The path narrowed, and the only sounds that accompanied us were the rustle of leaves and the occasional distant call of a bird. Hours passed, marked only by the growing sense of dread that tightened in my chest. We stopped periodically to call out Lila's name, our voices swallowed by the oppressive silence. I had nearly lost my sense of time when we reached a small clearing, where a fallen tree lay in our path. The sunlight broke through the canopy here, illuminating the ground, exposing the dark soil and the scattered leaves. As we skirted the tree, I noticed something glinting among the detritus. I crouched down, feeling a sudden thrill. My heart raced as I reached for the object, revealing a silver bracelet, delicate and shining in the muted light. "Is this hers?" I called out. Mark stepped closer, his frown deepening as he examined the bracelet. "It looks like it could be." He turned it over in his hands, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "It's definitely not something you find in the woods." A knot formed in my stomach as I thought of how Lila might have lost this piece of jewelry. Was she struggling? Had she been running, panicked? Before I could voice my concerns, a sharp scream pierced the air, sending a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me. It came from the direction we had just come. A moment of hesitation hung in the air, and then instinct kicked in. We sprinted back toward the sound, pushing through the underbrush, branches slapping against our skin as we ran. When we arrived back at the fallen tree, my heart dropped. One of our team, Jenna, lay crumpled on the ground, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. She just vanished," Jenna gasped, her voice trembling. "One moment she was right next to me, and then..." "Who?" I pressed, feeling the panic rise in my throat. Sarah. She was right there, and then she was gone. Tears streamed down Jenna's face as she glanced back toward the trees. Mark crouched beside Jenna, his expression shifting from concern to determination. We need to find her, now. Everyone, spread out, call her name. We fanned out, voices echoing through the trees, but the forest swallowed our cries. I felt the air grow colder, as if the forest itself conspired against us. I forced myself to stay calm, focusing on the sound of my own voice, calling for Sarah, hoping to hear a reply that might never come. Minutes passed like hours, and with each new call, our hope faded further into despair. I retraced our steps, each rustle in the underbrush making my heart race. The woods had grown oppressive, the shadows darker, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint whisper, carried by the wind. It was a voice, soft and ethereal, calling out a name. Help me. I turned, straining to listen, to locate the source. My breath quickened as I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I stepped cautiously toward the sound, heart pounding. As I rounded a thick tree trunk, I stumbled upon an old campsite, far more decrepit than any I had seen. Torn tents sagged under the weight of tangled vines, and the ground was littered with debris. My instinct screamed for me to turn back, but I was compelled to search. And then I saw her. A figure crouched near the remains of a campfire, her back turned toward me. I approached slowly, every nerve end alive with dread. Sarah? I whispered. She turned to me, and my blood ran cold. Her face was gaunt and her eyes were wide with fear. Get away from here, she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. It won't let you leave. Before I could respond, a low growl rumbled from the shadows behind her. I felt a primal fear grip me as darkness sprang to life, and the realization hit with horrifying clarity. We were now alone in the woods.